The gaslight trembles against the frost-fogged windows as Christmas settles over Victorian London. Inside, everything gleams polished silver, holly-trimmed mirrors, silk gowns brushing parquet floors. Laughter floats easily, controlled and practiced, but beneath the warmth of candlelight and carols, another presence moves quietly through these rooms, invisible, sweet-smelling, promised as comfort, a vapor drawn into the lungs while the season smiles on the surface. Ether is not taken like a vice, it arrives as refinement, a doctor's suggestion, a hostess's secret, a delicate breath to calm nerves overstimulated by society, obligation, and endless performance. At Christmas, when emotions must be contained and appearances flawless, it becomes the perfect companion. No glass to raise, no needle, no scandal, just a handkerchief, a vial, and a momentary escape from the pressure of being seen. Before we go further, take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. These stories linger best when shared quietly, together. Because when the music fades and the guests depart, something remains. Trembling hands beneath lace gloves, sleepless nights behind drawn curtains, minds that no longer return fully from that gentle drifting away. What began as seasonal relief becomes dependence, and Christmas, meant to symbolize restraint and virtue, turns into the most dangerous hiding place of all. This is the shocking ether addiction that ruined Christmas in Victorian High Society. Christmas arrives in Victorian London not with cheer, but with ceremony. The city dresses itself carefully, as though aware it is being watched. Snow settles into the grooves of cobblestone streets, softening the sound of carriage wheels and muffling the restless movement beneath. Gas lamps glow through the evening fog, their light refracted into halos that blur edges and conceal imperfections. From a distance, the city appears calm, even gentle. But closer in, beneath the frost and finery, something uneasy stirs. Inside the grand houses lining the squares and crescents, Christmas is an endurance as much as a celebration. Drawing rooms are prepared days in advance, polished until every surface reflects expectation. Garlands are arranged with restraint, never excess. Tables are set with silver that must gleam without appearing ostentatious. Every detail signals control tasteful, measured, respectable. The season demands it. Christmas is not a time for indulgence of emotion, only for its careful management. Voices rise politely over pianoforte music. Guests laugh when expected, nod at the appropriate moments, and maintain expressions calibrated somewhere between warmth and reserve. No one is meant to appear strained, though many are. The holidays bring obligations that cannot be refused, visits, dinners, appearances that stretch long into winter nights. Fatigue is unseemly. Irritability is a failure of character. Melancholy, especially in women, is not sorrow but weakness, a condition to be corrected rather than acknowledged. Doctors are summoned quietly during this season, not for emergencies, but for assurances. They arrive with their black bags and professional calm, diagnosing nerves frayed by overexertion, hearts made restless by too much stimulation, minds overtaxed by society's demands. Their language is gentle, reassuring. Nothing is seriously wrong, nothing that cannot be soothed. Remedies are suggested in low voices, as discreet as the ailments they address. Among these remedies is ether. It carries no reputation yet, no whisper of ruin. It smells faintly sweet, almost pleasant, and leaves no mark behind. Unlike laudanum, it does not stain the reputation. Unlike spirits, it does not cloud the face with drunkenness. It promises relief without consequence, distance without disorder. A modern solution for a modern season. It is introduced softly, a suggestion made in confidence. A small bottle wrapped carefully, its purpose explained in clinical terms. A few drops on a cloth, a breath or two. Enough to settle the nerves before guests arrive, or to quiet the mind after they depart. It is not indulgence, it is assistance. a tool for maintaining composure when composure is everything. During Christmas gatherings, its presence grows, not openly, never discussed aloud, but felt. A lady excuses herself briefly from the room, returning moments later with her colour restored and her smile steadied. A gentleman lingers near a window, inhaling deeply before rejoining the conversation. No one comments. Courtesy, after all, is the highest virtue of the season. Outside, carolers sing beneath the gaslight, their voices carrying through the cold. Inside, the air is warmer, heavier, scented with pine, wax, and something else, something thinner, fleeting, easily missed. Ether drifts through these rooms without resistance, welcomed as part of the invisible machinery that keeps the season running smoothly. Yet even now, in these early moments, it changes the shape of Christmas. The joy it supports is softened, rounded at the edges. The strain it relieves is postponed rather than resolved. Beneath the decorations and discipline, a quiet exchange has begun. Comfort traded for awareness, calm purchased at a cost not yet counted. As the snow continues to fall and the city glows beneath its careful lights, Victorian Christmas holds its breath, unaware that the season it trusts to preserve order has already opened the door to something that will not leave when the decorations come down. Christmas, in Victorian High Society, is less a moment than a performance stretched thin across weeks of expectation. It presses down gently at first, an invitation here, a card there, until the accumulation becomes impossible to ignore. Every household understands its role. Every family knows where it stands. To withdraw from the season is to admit weakness, eccentricity, or worse, impropriety. Participation is not optional. It is proof of social health. The calendar fills quickly. Luncheons bleed into dinners. Dinners demand return invitations. Afternoons vanish beneath visits that must be paid and repaid in equal measure. Each engagement requires preparation not only of the house, but of the self. One must arrive composed, attentive, agreeable. Fatigue is tolerated only when disguised as delicacy. Wariness must be worn prettily, like lace at the collar. For women especially, Christmas magnifies the unspoken labor of constant readiness. They are expected to host flawlessly, to soothe tensions before they surface, to animate rooms without appearing dominant, to absorb discomfort without complaint. A lady who appears strained has failed twice, once in endurance and again in concealment. Her discomfort becomes a personal shortcoming rather than a consequence of relentless demand. Men, too, feel the season's pressure, though it wears a different shape. The responsibility of provision, reputation, and steadiness intensifies during the holidays. A gentleman must be present, generous, attentive, yet unruffled. Any sign of agitation risks undermining the image of control upon which his authority rests. Christmas, for him, is not rest but scrutiny disguised as festivity. The season offers no sanctioned language for distress. There is joy, gratitude, charity. There is nostalgia, sentiment, obligation. There is no room for exhaustion, no allowance for overstimulation. The city glows, the churches fill, the newspapers praise domestic harmony, and so harmony must be produced, whether it exists or not. Medical thinking aligns neatly with this expectation. Emotional strain is reframed as physical fragility. Overwrought nerves, seasonal melancholy, holiday agitation. These are not responses to social pressure, but symptoms of an overtaxed constitution. Treatment is aimed not at altering circumstance, but at restoring performance. The patient is not encouraged to withdraw, but to endure more smoothly. Thus, the weight of Christmas becomes something to be managed quietly. The strain is real, but acknowledging it openly would fracture the illusion of universal contentment. Better to soften its effects, better to dull its edges, better to find a way to continue smiling through long evenings and crowded rooms without faltering. This is where ether finds its footing, not as indulgence, but as assistance. It offers a way to remain present without fully feeling present. It allows the mind to loosen just enough to withstand the press of expectation. For those crushed gently by the season's demands, it feels like a kindness, an elegant compromise between collapse and compliance. Its appeal lies in its subtlety. Ether does not announce itself. It does not require public consumption. It leaves no telltale glass, no flushed face. It fits perfectly within a culture that values discretion above all else. A breath taken alone in a bedroom, a moment in the privacy of a carriage. Relief arrives without witnesses. As Christmas advances, this quiet solution spreads through drawing rooms and corridors, not discussed openly, but recognized. A knowing glance, a pause, too brief to question. The season grows heavier, but fewer people appear to strain beneath it. The illusion holds. Yet beneath this smooth surface, something has shifted. The burden of Christmas is no longer merely endured, it is chemically negotiated. The season's weight is not lifted, only made tolerable through distance. And in that distance, something essential begins to thin. The ability to feel without assistance, to rest without remedy, to exist without the gentle veil of forgetting. The polite weight of the season remains. It always will. But now it presses against a society that has learned to inhale its way through obligation, and Christmas, once a measure of endurance, begins quietly teaching dependence instead. The Victorian drawing room is not merely a place of gathering, it is a proving ground. Every chair, every curtain, every carefully arranged ornament speaks the same language: control. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is excessive. Even warmth is regulated, allowed only within narrow bounds. At Christmas, these rooms become stages upon which discipline must perform itself flawlessly. From the moment guests arrive, the atmosphere tightens. Coats are taken, greetings exchanged, and the machinery of propriety hums into motion. Conversation must remain light, never probing. Laughter must sound natural, never too loud, never too scarce. Discomfort, if present, is absorbed silently. To falter is to disrupt the entire arrangement. The drawing room is especially unforgiving to emotion. Joy is permitted, but only the mild, polished kind smiles that do not stretch too wide, sentiments that do not linger too long. Grief, frustration, irritation, fatigue, these have no place here. They are considered private failings, best managed elsewhere, preferably without acknowledgement. Christmas intensifies this discipline. The season demands an idealized domestic harmony that leaves no room for contradiction. A hostess must radiate calm, regardless of the hours spent preparing, regardless of the strain of expectation. She must glide through the room, attentive yet effortless, anticipating needs before they are voiced. Her composure is not optional, it is her primary contribution. Guests observe these performances carefully, not with cruelty, but with habit. Every society event is a quiet assessment. Who tires too early, who speaks too sharply, who withdraws at the edge of the room. These details are noted, filed away, remembered long after the candles have burned down. Reputation is shaped in moments of visible strain. Men, too, are bound by the room's discipline. Their authority depends on steadiness. A gentleman who appears restless or withdrawn risks undermining his own position. He must be present without appearing overwhelmed, genial without appearing indulgent. The drawing room allows no visible cracks in the facade of control. Under this constant observation, bodies respond. Shoulders tighten, breaths shorten, thoughts grow crowded. The effort required to remain composed begins to outweigh the pleasure of participation. Yet withdrawal is not permitted. To decline invitations is to invite speculation. To retreat is to signal weakness. Thus, discomfort must be managed internally. The body becomes something to be regulated, adjusted, subdued. This is not perceived as cruelty, but as refinement. Self-control is the highest virtue. Mastery over one's sensations is proof of moral standing. Medical advice reinforces this ideal. Emotional discomfort is framed as a physiological imbalance, nerves overstimulated, senses exhausted, constitution strained. The solution is not rest from society, but assistance in enduring it. Relief is offered not to change the environment, but to help the individual continue functioning within it. Ether enters these drawing rooms quietly, as if it belongs there. It complements the culture perfectly. Its effects are invisible. Its use requires no public acknowledgement. It does not disrupt posture or speech when taken carefully. Instead, it softens the internal resistance that builds beneath discipline's demands. A hostess inhales before greeting her guests, smoothing away the tremor in her hands. A guest steps aside briefly, returning composed, eyes slightly unfocused but socially intact. No one asks. No one remarks. The room continues its ritual uninterrupted. Over time, the discipline of the drawing room becomes inseparable from this quiet aid. Composure is no longer solely the product of willpower. It is chemically reinforced. The expectation remains unchanged, but the means of meeting it have shifted. What appears outwardly as impeccable self-control begins to rely on a fragile internal arrangement. The body learns that discipline can be outsourced, that calm can be summoned rather than cultivated. The drawing room does not notice the difference. It only demands the result. And so Christmas evenings pass beneath chandeliers and garlands, each gathering a careful choreography of restraint. The discipline holds. The room remains flawless, but beneath the polished surfaces, something new has taken root, a dependence disguised as decorum, inhaled quietly behind closed doors, sustaining the illusion at a cost no one yet dares to name. In Victorian medicine, the female body is rarely permitted neutrality. It is either thriving or failing, steady or overwhelmed, composed or collapsing. There is little room for ordinary strain. At Christmas, when stimulation multiplies and expectations tighten, this imbalance becomes doctrine. Excitement itself is treated as danger, a force capable of unraveling a woman whose constitution is presumed delicate by design. Doctors speak of nerves as though they are fine wires stretched too thin. Too much noise, too much light, too many visitors, too many emotions. Arriving too quickly, these are believed to inflame the system. The season, with its crowds and obligations, is quietly blamed, but responsibility is redirected inward. It is not the demands that are excessive, it is the body that is insufficiently resilient. Women are encouraged to see their own fatigue not as exhaustion, but as pathology. Sleeplessness is a symptom. Irritability is a sign of imbalance. Tears, without obvious cause, are framed as nervous weakness rather than emotional overload. The language is clinical, but the implication is moral. A woman who struggles during the holidays is not responding naturally to pressure. She is failing to regulate herself. Christmas gatherings sharpen this diagnosis. The excitement of company, music, conversation, and ceremony is believed to tax the female nervous system disproportionately. Even pleasure is suspect. Too much joy is considered destabilizing. Too much laughter, too much animation, too much feeling, all are treated as threats to equilibrium. Medical texts of the period describe women as particularly vulnerable to overstimulation, their nerves more responsive, their emotions more volatile. This fragility is not framed as injustice, but as fact. It is used to justify intervention, correction, and control. Relief is prescribed not to free women from strain, but to restore their ability to endure it quietly. Ether slips easily into this framework. It is described as calming without dulling, soothing without corruption, a marvel of modern chemistry capable of settling agitation without visible cost. For women expected to maintain composure under increasing strain, it appears almost merciful. A few breaths are said to quiet racing thoughts. A brief inhalation promises to smooth heightened emotion. It allows a woman to remain present at her own Christmas table without betraying the effort required to do so. Her smile returns. Her voice steadies. Her hands cease their subtle trembling. Crucially, ether does not challenge the belief in female fragility, it reinforces it. The problem is not the expectation placed upon women, but their supposed inability to meet it unaided. Ether becomes the bridge between demand and endurance. Its use is framed not as escape, but as correction. Husbands and fathers accept this readily. A calm household is the highest goal, especially during the holidays. If a wife or daughter requires assistance to maintain serenity, it is seen as practical, even caring. The intervention is quiet, discreet, and sanctioned by authority. No scandal attaches to it. No moral judgment follows. Over time, the boundary between normal emotional response and nervous disorder erodes. Feeling overwhelmed becomes synonymous with illness. Relief becomes necessary not only during moments of distress, but preemptively before dinners, before visits, before the strain arrives. Ether is no longer a response. It is preparation. This shift is subtle, almost invisible. A woman learns to mistrust her own sensations. Anxiety is no longer something to be worked through. It is something to be suppressed. Joy, too, is moderated, flattened into something manageable. The full range of feeling becomes suspect, something to be carefully controlled lest it tip into instability. Christmas, once a season of heightened emotion, is transformed into a test of regulation. Women are praised not for their resilience, but for their composure. The quieter they become, the more successful they are judged to be. Ether assists in this transformation, smoothing away the edges of experience until only the acceptable remains. What begins as accommodation hardens into expectation. A woman who relies on ether to manage the season is not seen as dependent, but as prudent. Her fragility is acknowledged, treated, and quietly reinforced. And beneath the evergreen garlands and carefully arranged smiles, a deeper lesson takes hold that feeling too much is dangerous, and forgetting, even briefly, is far safer. The Victorian doctor arrives without urgency. His presence is calm, his manner measured, his voice low and reassuring. He is invited not into crisis, but into discomfort, the kind that cannot be named aloud. During the Christmas season, his visits increase quietly, not for fevers or injuries, but for nerves unsettled, sleep disturbed, spirits strained thin by obligation and excess. He listens patiently as symptoms are described in careful language: restlessness, palpitations, a sense of agitation without cause, fatigue that lingers even after rest. These complaints are offered apologetically, as though the speaker fears appearing indulgent or ungrateful for the season's blessings. The doctor nods. He has heard this before. He hears it every winter. His diagnosis is rarely alarming. There is no talk of danger, no warning of consequence. Instead, he speaks of balance, of overstimulation, of the nervous system working too hard beneath the demands of society and celebration. Christmas, he explains gently, places particular strain upon sensitive constitutions. It is natural, understandable, temporary. What matters is management. He does not suggest withdrawal from society. That would be impractical, even harmful. Social engagement, after all, is considered essential to mental and moral health. Nor does he advise reducing obligations. The season's demands are immutable. Instead, he offers relief that allows life to continue uninterrupted. Ether is presented as such relief. Not dramatically, not with emphasis. It is mentioned alongside other modern comforts, part of the growing confidence in chemical solutions. He explains its effects clinically, its ability to calm excitation, to ease nervous tension, to promote rest without deep sedation. He assures his patient that it is clean, refined, and safe when used appropriately. The language is crucial. Ether is not framed as indulgence, but as correction. It restores equilibrium. It smooths the overworked mind. It allows the body to recover without visible impairment. Unlike opiates, it does not linger heavily. Unlike alcohol, it does not coarsen behavior. It leaves no trace. The doctor's authority lends weight to every word. He is a figure of trust, educated, respectable, aligned with progress. His assurances quiet doubt before it can form. When he speaks of moderation, it is not a warning but a formality. The patient hears what matters most, that relief is available, and it is sanctioned. Instructions are given discreetly. A few drops on a cloth, a brief inhalation, only when necessary, especially helpful during moments of excitement or difficulty sleeping. The bottle is small, easily concealed, its presence unremarkable. It is medicine, not temptation. Families accept this guidance without question. A calm household is preferable to a strained one. If ether can preserve harmony through the demanding weeks of Christmas, it is welcomed. The doctor's visit reassures everyone involved that nothing improper is occurring. Science has spoken. The remedy is approved. Over time, these assurances accumulate. Ether becomes familiar, routine, unremarkable. It is no longer associated with illness, but with maintenance. A tool to preserve composure when circumstances threaten to overwhelm it. The line between treatment and reliance begins to blur, but no one names it. The doctor rarely witnesses the full effect of his advice. He prescribes relief, then departs. He does not see the quiet escalation, the cloth held longer, the breaths drawn deeper, the moments of calm increasingly sought before strain rather than after. His role ends at reassurance. Christmas passes. The season dissolves back into ordinary time, but the remedy remains. The patient remembers how easily the strain lifted, how quickly peace returned. The doctor's words linger. Safe, modern, controlled, and so ether stays within reach, its use no longer confined to the holidays. What began as a seasonal accommodation, offered with gentle authority, becomes something more enduring. The doctor's assurance has done its work not by deceiving, but by soothing concern away entirely. In a society that trusts progress and prizes composure, no one questions the cost of calm when it arrives so politely, wrapped in medical certainty and delivered with a steady hand. By the time Christmas week arrives in earnest, ether no longer feels like an intrusion. It settles into the season as naturally as candle wax and evergreen branches, another quiet accommodation made in the name of smooth celebration. Its presence is rarely announced. It does not arrive wrapped or displayed. It waits instead in drawers, pockets, bedside tables close enough to reach without thought. The holiday rhythm encourages it. Mornings begin early, filled with preparations that cannot be delayed. Afternoons stretch into visits that must be endured graciously. Evenings culminate in dinners that linger long past comfort, followed by music, conversation, and the expectation of pleasant wakefulness. The body is asked to remain alert when it longs for rest, composed when it aches with fatigue. Ether offers itself in these moments without resistance, a brief retreat upstairs before guests arrive, a pause behind a closed door. The cloth emerges, the bottle is uncorked. The scent rises faintly sweet, fleeting, unmistakably modern. A breath is taken, then another. The world loosens just enough. It does not feel like escape. That is its genius. There is no dramatic shift, no collapse into stupor. Instead, the mind steps slightly aside from its own strain. Thoughts soften. The constant internal monitoring, the fear of saying too much or too little, of faltering at precisely the wrong moment recedes. What remains is quiet compliance. The body continues, but the effort becomes distant. For many, this is the first Christmas they remember, without the usual weight pressing so sharply at the chest. They return to the drawing room calmer, steadier, easier to please. Their voices carry warmth without tension. Their smiles hold without strain. No one remarks on the change except to note, approvingly, how well they look. The ritual repeats itself throughout the holiday. After church services thick with incense and expectation. Before evening gatherings dense with obligation. Late at night, when exhaustion refuses to release its grip and sleep will not come, ether becomes the thread that stitches one demand to the next, ensuring continuity where the body would otherwise falter. Its holiday association strengthens its appeal. Christmas, after all, is temporary. What is used to endure it feels likewise provisional. There is reassurance in believing that this reliance has an end point, that once the decorations are packed away and the calendar turns, the need will pass. Ether, like the season itself, is framed as a short indulgence. Yet the body does not observe calendars. It learns patterns instead. It learns that relief can be summoned quickly, reliably, without social consequence. It learns that calm no longer requires patience or withdrawal. A breath replaces endurance. The nervous system adapts quietly, eagerly. Within families, ether's role remains unspoken but understood. A daughter is calmer this year. A wife no longer retreats early from gatherings. A hostess manages her evenings without visible fatigue. These improvements are welcomed. No one questions the means when the result aligns so perfectly with expectation. Doctors continue their visits through the season, pleased to hear reports of improvement. Sleep has returned, irritability has lessened, spirits are steadier. The remedy appears to be working exactly as intended. No adjustments are suggested, no cautions offered beyond the familiar word moderation which floats lightly, unexamined. By 12th night, when the last formalities are observed and the city begins its slow return to routine, ether remains quietly in place. It has proven itself useful, reliable, necessary, perhaps, though that word is never spoken. What began as a seasonal vapor now lingers beyond the holidays. The body remembers the relief too clearly to surrender it entirely. And as Victorian Christmas recedes into memory, ether stays behind, not as a guest, but as a companion, learned during the season when endurance mattered most. The holidays have passed smoothly, appearances were maintained, discipline held, but something subtle has shifted beneath the surface. The season demanded calm and ether answered. Now the question lingers, unasked and unanswered, of how calm will be managed when the vapor is no longer confined to Christmas alone. What makes ether so readily accepted is not merely its effect, but its absence of offense. It does not announce itself the way other comforts do. There is no glass left behind, no lingering odor clinging to clothing, no visible sign of indulgence. It leaves no smoke in the air, no stain on reputation. In a society governed by appearances, this absence is everything. Alcohol carries history with it: public houses, loosened tongues, flushed cheeks, the risk of spectacle. Opium, though widely used, bears an undercurrent of suspicion. Its association with dependency, already whispered about in medical circles. Ether, by contrast, feels untouched by such concerns. It is clinical, modern, brief in its presence, and seemingly obedient to intention. Its use fits seamlessly into Victorian ideals of restraint. A lady who inhales ether does not stagger or slur. She does not laugh too loudly or speak out of turn. If anything, she grows quieter, smoother, more contained. The very qualities prized by society are enhanced, not undermined. Ether does not disrupt decorum, it perfects it. This distinction matters deeply. Respectability in Victorian High Society is not only about behavior, but about visibility. What cannot be seen cannot easily be judged. Ether's effects retreat inward, operating beneath the surface, leaving the exterior untouched. It allows one to comply with expectation, while privately disengaging from its weight. The lack of residue becomes its strongest defense. There is nothing to hide afterward, no objects to dispose of hastily, no scent that betrays use. The cloth can be folded away, the vial closed. Life resumes without interruption. Even those who rely on ether regularly find it easy to believe that nothing permanent is occurring. Each use feels isolated, contained, concluded. Families take comfort in this cleanliness. A daughter who inhales ether is not viewed with the same concern as one who drinks spirits or takes stronger narcotics. There is no visible moral compromise, no public risk. The household remains intact, orderly, respectable. Ether preserves the illusion of control. Medical authority reinforces this perception. Doctors speak of ether's volatility as reassurance. Its effects are said to pass quickly, leaving the system unburdened. It does not linger. It does not accumulate. Or so it is believed. The absence of immediate consequence is mistaken for absence of harm. As Christmas traditions repeat year after year, ether's role grows more secure. It becomes part of the unseen scaffolding supporting social life. Used discreetly, it helps ensure that no one collapses under the strain of expectation. Its very invisibility shields it from scrutiny. Those who inhale it regularly begin to appreciate this quality above all else. They can endure long evenings without drawing attention. They can quiet their minds without explanation. They can participate fully while feeling only partially present. The world praises their composure, unaware of the quiet assistance sustaining it. This lack of visible cost delays recognition. There are no early warnings dramatic enough to provoke alarm. The decline, when it comes, is subtle fatigue that lingers longer than it should, emotions that feel blunted, moments of detachment that persist beyond the intended relief. These changes are easily attributed to temperament, age, or the general wear of life. Ether's greatest protection is that it never openly betrays its user. It does not force confession. It does not demand acknowledgement. It allows dependency to grow without spectacle. In a culture that equates morality with appearance, this is a powerful shield. And so it continues, drifting quietly through Victorian households, leaving no smoke to choke on, no stain to scrub away. It alters experience without altering surfaces. It reshapes endurance without reshaping reputation. By the time its cost becomes undeniable, the habit has already woven itself too deeply into daily life to be easily named, let alone abandoned. What society cannot see, it does not fear. And ether, colorless and fleeting, thrives precisely because it leaves nothing behind but silence. Discretion is the final refinement of Victorian life, and nowhere is it practiced more carefully than during Christmas gatherings. The rooms are full, the conversations layered, the music constant. Yet within this bustle exists a choreography of small disappearances, moments when a guest steps away without comment, when a hostess drifts toward a quieter corridor, when a gentleman lingers near a window longer than necessary. These movements attract no notice. They are part of the social grammar, understood without being spoken. Behind heavy curtains and half-closed doors, the ritual unfolds. A handkerchief is unfolded, its linen already softened by prior use. The vial appears briefly, its glass cool to the touch. A few drops fall, precise and practiced. The cloth is raised, the breath drawn in carefully. Not deeply, never greedily, but enough to still the rising pressure inside the chest. The effect is swift. The noise of the gathering dulls, receding to a manageable distance. Thoughts lose their sharp edges. The constant vigilance required to remain agreeable loosens its grip. In these brief moments, the body is allowed to rest without withdrawing, to recover without explanation. The handkerchief is folded again, returned to a pocket or sleeve, the curtain shifts, the individual re-enters the room carrying no visible trace of absence. To onlookers, nothing has occurred. Conversation resumes as though uninterrupted. the illusion of effortless endurance remains intact. This ritual spreads quietly through households and seasons. It is never discussed openly, never acknowledged as shared behavior, yet recognition exists. A glance exchanged between two women who have both stepped away at different moments. A subtle nod between acquaintances who understand the necessity of brief retreat. The handkerchief becomes a symbol not of weakness, but of adaptation. Christmas encourages this secrecy. The season celebrates togetherness while leaving little room for individual strain. Privacy must be carved out in slivers. Ether provides a way to reclaim a measure of autonomy without challenging the collective performance. It allows one to continue participating while momentarily disengaging from the cost. Over time, these hidden interludes grow more frequent. The body begins to anticipate relief, to seek it before discomfort fully forms. A tightening of the chest, a flicker of agitation, a hint of fatigue, and the handkerchief is already in hand. The ritual becomes preventative, not responsive. Because it happens out of sight, it remains beyond scrutiny. No one sees the repetition. No one observes the increasing reliance. The act is too small, too brief, too well concealed to attract concern. Even the individual may not fully register its frequency. Each use feels justified by the moment, necessary for composure, harmless in isolation. The architecture of Victorian homes aids this concealment. Corridors, alcoves, stair landings, spaces designed to facilitate movement without observation. The very structure of domestic life accommodates the ritual, offering refuge for moments that cannot be publicly acknowledged. Men adopt similar habits, though with different justifications. A pause in the study, a moment alone in the carriage, the same cloth, the same breath, the same quiet return to duty. Ether equalizes endurance across gendered expectations, though it remains more quietly sanctioned for women, whose fragility has already been medically affirmed. The handkerchief, once a symbol of propriety, now carries an additional function. It absorbs not tears, but tension. It becomes an intermediary between obligation and relief. In its folds, composure is restored. Yet each retreat carries a subtle cost. The room is re-entered with less engagement, less emotional investment. Presence becomes performative rather than felt. The season continues, but participation grows thinner, more distant. Behind the curtain, the ritual repeats. It is efficient, invisible, and increasingly necessary. And as Christmas evenings pass in a blur of polite conversation and softened sensation, the handkerchief remains close, ready to deliver calm without witness, relief without interruption, and a quiet lesson in how easily endurance can be outsourced when discretion is perfected. What ether offers most convincingly is not pleasure, but distance. Not escape, but a gentle stepping back from the immediate weight of sensation. It creates a narrow space between feeling and response, a margin in which the mind can breathe without leaving the body behind. For a society trained to endure rather than to confess, this distance feels merciful. The effect is subtle at first. Sounds soften. The sharpness of conversation dulls into something manageable. Faces remain distinct, yet less demanding. The room continues to exist, but it no longer presses so insistently upon the nerves. One is present, but not entirely entangled. It is this partial withdrawal, this ability to remain while retreating, that makes ether so appealing. During Christmas, when the density of expectation reaches its height, such distance feels like a gift. The season asks for warmth without fatigue, generosity without depletion, cheer without vulnerability. Ether supplies a way to comply. It does not demand surrender to oblivion. It simply lowers the volume of the world. Those who rely on it describe a peculiar clarity within the calm. Thoughts slow, but do not vanish. Anxiety recedes, but awareness remains. It feels controlled, intentional, temporary. The mind reassures itself that this is not avoidance, merely adjustment, a short pause before returning fully to the task at hand. This belief is crucial. Ether's comfort lies in its promise of impermanence. Each use is framed as an isolated event, a response to a particularly taxing evening, an especially long day, an unusually crowded gathering. The distance it creates is meant to be brief, a momentary reprieve before re-engagement. And for a time, this appears true. After the effect fades, the individual resumes ordinary sensation. The world sharpens again. Duties continue. Nothing seems lost. The relief feels earned, deserved, contained. Yet the body begins to notice the contrast. It remembers how much easier endurance becomes when sensation is muted. It recalls the calm that arrived without effort, without negotiation. The unassisted state, full presence, full feeling, starts to feel unnecessarily harsh by comparison. Gradually, the threshold shifts. Situations once tolerated without aid now feel intolerable without it. The noise of conversation grows sharper, the press of expectation heavier. The distance, once reserved for extreme moments, begins to be summoned for ordinary ones. Still, the illusion of control persists. Because ether does not overwhelm the senses, it is easy to believe that mastery remains intact. The user chooses when to step back. The user decides how far. The distance feels governed by will, not compulsion. This belief is reinforced by the culture itself. Victorian restraint prizes emotional moderation. To feel less is not failure, it is refinement. Ether's quiet distancing aligns perfectly with this ideal. It does not encourage excess or abandon, it encourages containment. Christmas, in particular, rewards this containment. Those who remain composed through long celebrations are praised, their calm is admired, their steadiness becomes evidence of character. The distance ether provides is mistaken for virtue. Yet something essential begins to thin within that space. The softened joy does not fully return. Laughter feels flatter, sentiment becomes muted, even relief loses its richness. The distance that once offered respite begins to hollow experience rather than preserve it. The individual senses this dimming but struggles to name it. There is no dramatic collapse, no visible harm, only a subtle fading, a sense of being slightly removed even when fully present. The distance lingers longer than intended. Still, the comfort remains compelling. Faced with the choice between sharp feeling and softened endurance, the latter continues to win. Ether's promise that distance can be borrowed without consequence holds firm. And so the space between self and sensation becomes familiar, even necessary. What was once a temporary accommodation begins to resemble a preferred state. Christmas passes. The season loosens its grip, but the habit of distance remains, quietly reshaping how presence itself is experienced, less immediate, less demanding, and increasingly dependent on the gentle veil that first appeared to offer nothing more than comfort. By the time Christmas Day arrives, the machinery of endurance is fully engaged. The city wakes beneath pale winter light, bells sounding through fog, carriages already moving toward church doors and family thresholds. Inside the houses of high society, everything appears to function as it should. Faces are composed, voices are measured, no one falters beneath the weight of the season. Collapse, at least on the surface, has been avoided. This is taken as success. The long weeks of preparation, obligation, and performance have not broken anyone visibly. Dinners were hosted, visits were paid, music was played, gratitude was expressed. The household holds together, orderly and calm, exactly as the season demands. And in that smoothness lies the quiet triumph of ether. It has done its work invisibly. Where exhaustion once threatened tears or withdrawal, composure remained. Where nerves once trembled at the edge of panic, stillness arrived instead. Ether has allowed Christmas to proceed without interruption, without embarrassment, without scenes that would require explanation. Those who relied upon it feel a subdued pride. They have endured the season. They have met expectation. They have not burdened others with visible strain. In a culture that values self-command above all else, this restraint feels like virtue rewarded. Families, too, take comfort in the outcome. A daughter who once grew overwhelmed now remains present throughout the day. A hostess who once retired early now sees the evening through. The absence of distress is interpreted as health restored, balance achieved. No one asks how this calm was obtained. The result alone is enough. Doctors, had they been consulted, would have been satisfied. Their prescriptions appear effective. The nervous symptoms have subsided. Sleep has returned, or at least seems to have. Emotional volatility has quieted. The remedy has delivered exactly what was promised, a season without collapse. Yet beneath this outward stability, something has changed. The Christmas that unfolds feels strangely muted. Joy arrives softened, as though wrapped in cotton. The warmth of connection is present, but distant. Moments that should feel full register only faintly, like echoes rather than experiences. This is not recognized immediately. There is relief in simply having made it through. Relief is powerful enough to drown out subtler losses. When exhaustion has been successfully managed, few pause to consider what may have been diminished in the process. Ether has preserved function, but at a quiet cost. The body remembers how close it came to faltering, and how easily that faltering was prevented. The mind takes note of the solution. Christmas has proven that endurance no longer requires struggle. Calm can be summoned, distance can be applied. This lesson does not fade with the season. When decorations are removed and routines resume, the memory remains. The individual recalls that the holidays were survived not through resilience alone, but through assistance. The absence of collapse becomes the benchmark by which future strain is measured. Ordinary difficulties begin to feel unnecessarily harsh without intervention. Minor agitation seems excessive. Restlessness feels intolerable. The threshold for discomfort lowers, shaped by the recent experience of chemically supported calm. Yet because no breakdown occurred, no reckoning follows. There is no crisis to provoke reflection, no dramatic consequence to demand restraint. The season passed smoothly. That is all that matters. Christmas, once a test of endurance, has quietly become a demonstration of something else, the effectiveness of intervention in preserving appearances. Ether has proven itself capable of carrying individuals through the most demanding social ritual of the year without visible damage. But the measure of success has shifted. It is no longer about how one feels, but about how one appears. Not about the richness of experience, but about its manageability. Collapse has been avoided, yes, but so, too, has depth. As the last guests depart and the candles burn down to stubs, the house grows quiet. The season ends without incident. And in that quiet, ether remains no longer merely a holiday aid, but a proven safeguard against strain. Christmas has passed without collapse. But something subtler has given way. The belief that endurance must be lived through fully, rather than inhaled away. Before ether ever drifted through parlors scented with pine and candle smoke, it belonged to a very different world. Its earliest reputation was not one of indulgence, but of innovation. It emerged from laboratories and lecture halls, introduced with the language of progress and precision. In the Victorian imagination, this mattered profoundly. A substance born of science carried moral weight. It arrived already clothed in respectability. Ether first gained prominence in the operating theatre, where it was hailed as a marvel, an agent capable of silencing pain itself. Surgeons spoke of it with awe. Patients slipped into unconsciousness and returned without memory of the blade. Newspapers reported its triumphs with fascination. Pain, once unavoidable, had become negotiable. This alone secured ether a place among the era's most celebrated achievements. Its medical pedigree protected it. Ether was not associated with the vices of the street or the excesses of taverns. It was not traded in shadowed dens, but discussed openly in journals, demonstrated before learned audiences, administered by trained hands. Its use signaled advancement, not moral decay. To trust ether was to trust science itself. As its effects became better understood, physicians began to explore applications beyond surgery. If ether could quiet physical agony, might it not also soothe nervous distress? Victorian medicine, increasingly focused on the nervous system, welcomed such speculation. The mind, after all, was now thought to be governed by the same principles as the body: chemical, electrical, responsive to intervention. Gradually, ether's role expanded. It moved from hospitals into private practices, from emergency use into routine recommendation. Doctors spoke of it as gentle, controllable, modern. They contrasted it favorably with older remedies that carried heavier reputations. Ether, they insisted, was clean. It evaporated quickly. It left no residue. It did not linger in the system as other substances did, or so they believed. This scientific framing shaped public perception. Ether was not feared because it was understood, or at least thought to be. It bore none of the moral ambiguity that clung to opium or alcohol. Its origins were clinical, its language technical. To use ether was not to surrender to vice, but to accept help from progress. Victorian High Society embraced this narrative eagerly. Science was admired. Innovation was celebrated. The upper classes, in particular, prided themselves on alignment with modern thought. A remedy endorsed by medical authority and grounded in scientific discovery fit neatly within their self-image. Crucially, ether's respectable origins insulated it from suspicion as it moved into domestic spaces. When a bottle appeared in a household, it did not provoke alarm. It suggested prudence, not excess. Its presence implied that the family was attentive to health, responsive to modern understanding, willing to adopt the best tools available. Even language softened its impact. Ether was rarely spoken of as a drug. It was an agent, a vapor, a compound. The terminology mattered. Words stripped it of menace and placed it firmly within the realm of medicine. A lady who inhaled ether was not indulging. She was following advice. Over time, its surgical legacy faded from everyday memory, replaced by its quieter domestic role. Yet the authority of its origins remained. Few questioned a substance that had once conquered pain itself. Its success in the operating theatre lent credibility to every subsequent use. This pedigree made ether uniquely dangerous. It carried no stigma to slow its spread, no moral panic to restrain enthusiasm. Its transition from hospital to home felt natural, even inevitable. The same force that had dulled the surgeon's knife now promised to soften the pressures of daily life. And so ether entered Christmas drawing rooms not as an intruder, but as a continuation of progress. Its respectable beginnings shielded it from doubt. Its scientific reputation quieted concern. What had begun as a triumph of medicine now drifted, unnoticed, into the intimate spaces of Victorian endurance, still trusted, still praised, and increasingly untethered from the caution that once confined it. The vapor that had conquered pain was now asked to conquer feeling itself. Victorian medicine does not advance by revelation, but by accumulation. Observations are recorded, discussed, refined, and quietly normalized through print. Journals circulate from consulting rooms to lecture halls, carrying the authority of consensus even when certainty remains thin. It is within these pages, dense with case notes and cautious optimism, that ether's seasonal role begins to take shape. Physicians write of winter nerves with increasing frequency. The colder months, they note, bring a predictable rise in agitation, sleeplessness, palpitations, and vague complaints that resist precise diagnosis. Christmas, though rarely named outright, hovers at the margins of these reports, an unspoken intensifier of stimulation and fatigue. The season is described obliquely: periods of unusual excitement, times of prolonged social exertion, domestic demands exceeding ordinary measure. Ether appears as a solution offered with restraint. Articles describe its use in measured tones, careful to avoid sensationalism. A few inhalations, the writers suggest, can calm nervous excitability without plunging the patient into stupor. It is praised for its rapid onset and equally rapid departure, a remedy that acts and then withdraws, leaving the system ostensibly unburdened. These accounts matter not because they are dramatic, but because they are repetitive. Case after case presents ether as effective, manageable, and free from complication. The language is clinical and reassuring. There are no warnings printed in bold, no emphasis on dependency. Instead, the focus rests on function restored, sleep achieved, agitation reduced, composure regained. Seasonal application emerges gradually, almost accidentally. A physician notes that symptoms worsen during holiday gatherings. Another observes that patients benefit from ether during periods of heightened domestic activity. Over time, these remarks coalesce into pattern. Ether becomes associated not only with illness, but with circumstance. It is a remedy for times rather than conditions. Christmas fits neatly into this framework. The season's excess of sound, obligation, and emotional expectation is reinterpreted as physiological stress. The solution, therefore, need not involve reducing celebration or altering custom. It requires only that the nervous system be assisted through the strain. Journals reflect this logic without challenging it. The underlying assumption remains unexamined, that society's demands are fixed, while the individual must adapt. Ether's role is to facilitate adaptation, not to provoke reconsideration of what is being endured. Doctors reading these journals carry their conclusions into practice. When patients present with winter agitation, the response feels almost predetermined. Ether has been discussed, tested, endorsed quietly, authoritatively. Prescribing it feels responsible, informed by the latest thinking. The absence of alarm within the literature reinforces confidence. Where other substances begin to attract cautionary notes, ether remains largely unchallenged. Its volatility is cited as protection. Its fleeting presence in the body is assumed to preclude lasting effect. The idea that repeated, seasonal use might accumulate consequences does not yet register. This omission proves critical. Journals shape not only treatment, but perception. What is not warned against is assumed safe. What is discussed without urgency is received without fear. Ether's portrayal as a mild, situational aid encourages its use precisely at the moments when repetition is most likely, during the predictable stress of the holidays. By the time Christmas approaches, the prescription feels almost seasonal itself, a remedy aligned with the calendar, something to be considered as naturally as warmer clothing or richer food. The vapor becomes part of winter's medical vocabulary, spoken of in the same breath as rest and moderation. Patients trust this guidance, families accept it. The imprimatur of print confers legitimacy beyond individual opinion. Ether is no longer merely recommended by one physician. It is supported by the weight of collective observation. Yet beneath the calm prose and careful phrasing, a gap widens. Journals record immediate outcomes, not long-term habits. They note relief, not reliance. They measure symptoms abated, not sensation dulled. The slow transformation of seasonal aid into expectation remains invisible to the page. As winter returns year after year, so too does the prescription. Ether drifts from journal to practice, from practice to household, from household to habit, its seasonal endorsements sealed in ink, its risks left unprinted. In the quiet authority of medical literature, a temporary solution is given permanence. And Christmas, framed as a moment of necessary endurance, becomes the season that teaches medicine how easily calm can be prescribed without asking what it costs. What reassures Victorian society most about ether is not its effectiveness, but the conviction that it ends cleanly. It arrives, it soothes, it departs. This belief that calm can be borrowed without cost settles deeply into both medical thinking and domestic habit. Ether's effects feel self-contained, neatly bounded by the moment of use. Once the cloth is folded away, the episode is considered finished. This assumption shapes everything that follows. Unlike remedies that linger in the body or alter behavior visibly, ether seems to vanish without trace. Its lightness becomes proof of safety. Physicians speak of it as fleeting, a substance that evaporates almost as quickly as it is inhaled. Patients feel alert again within minutes. There is no heavy stupor, no prolonged haze. The mind appears restored, refreshed rather than altered. This immediacy creates confidence. Calm arrives quickly and leaves no obvious residue behind. It feels transactional relief exchanged for nothing. The nervous system settles, sleep follows. Wakefulness resumes. Nothing appears diminished. In Victorian households, this reinforces the belief that ether does not change the self, only assists it. One does not become someone else under its influence. One simply becomes more manageable, more composed, more aligned with expectation. The core identity remains untouched, or so it seems. This illusion is powerful. It encourages repetition without reflection. If nothing bad follows, there is no reason to stop. If relief comes without penalty, why endure strain unaided? Ether's greatest success lies in how little it appears to take. Doctors echo this confidence. They reassure patients that ether does not accumulate in the body. Its volatility is cited as virtue. It cannot linger, they insist, because it dissipates so readily. The absence of immediate harm is interpreted as proof of long-term safety. Yet what no one measures is the subtle shift in baseline experience. Ether may leave the bloodstream quickly, but it leaves memory behind. The body remembers how easily calm arrived. The mind recalls how sharply distress faded. These impressions do not evaporate. They settle quietly, reshaping expectation. After repeated use, ordinary sensations begin to feel excessive. The unassisted state, alert, responsive, fully present, starts to feel abrasive. Noise is louder, obligation heavier, emotional fluctuation less tolerable. Ether has not damaged the nerves in any visible way, but it has altered their threshold. This change is gradual, nearly imperceptible. There is no single moment when reliance announces itself. Instead, preference develops. The individual begins to favor the softened state, not because the ordinary state is unbearable, but because comparison has been introduced. Calm without consequence becomes an assumption rather than a question. Each use reinforces the belief that relief need not be earned through rest, reflection, or withdrawal. It can be summoned instantly, precisely, without negotiation. Victorian culture welcomes this notion. Self-command is prized. Emotional moderation is admired. A remedy that facilitates restraint without visible compromise fits perfectly within the moral landscape. Ether appears to support virtue rather than undermine it. Christmas strengthens this belief. The season's demands are intense but temporary. Ether is framed as equally temporary. When the holidays end, the reasoning goes, so too will the need. There is comfort in this symmetry. Dependence cannot form because the occasion itself is fleeting. But the body does not experience time as the calendar does. It learns patterns, not seasons. Once it associates calm with intervention, it begins to anticipate that intervention. What was once situational becomes habitual. Still, the myth persists. Because no collapse occurs, because no scandal erupts, because life continues uninterrupted, ether remains blameless. Its effects are judged only by what is visible, and what is visible looks like success. The idea of calm without consequence settles into Victorian life as a quiet promise. A promise that feeling can be regulated without loss, that endurance can be sustained without cost, that relief can be taken without debt. It is a promise that will not keep. But for now, it remains unchallenged, whispered in medical advice, reinforced in domestic practice, and proven, year after year, by Christmas seasons that pass without breakdown. The absence of consequence becomes the strongest argument of all, and ether continues its work beneath that comforting belief, altering not behavior, but expectation itself. The body is patient. It adapts without announcement, without drama. It learns through repetition rather than decision, through relief rather than intention. What the mind believes to be choice, the body records as pattern. With ether, this distinction becomes quietly decisive. At first, the sensation is unmistakable. The slight lightening behind the eyes, the softening of sound, the easing of pressure that had seemed inseparable from consciousness itself. The body registers this as improvement, as correction, a state closer to equilibrium. When the effect fades, the memory remains clear, convincing, and instructive. The next time discomfort arises, the body recalls what worked. This recall is not deliberate. It arrives as suggestion, a subtle inclination toward relief. A restlessness appears sooner than before. A tightening in the chest is noticed earlier. The threshold for discomfort lowers, not because the world has grown harsher, but because an alternative has been introduced. Ether teaches the body that drifting is possible. This drifting is not unconsciousness, it is not surrender. It is a partial disengagement, a floating just above the weight of sensation. The body remains upright, functional, composed, but something within loosens its grip. Muscles relax not through rest, but through release. Attention blurs at the edges. The effort of being fully present dissolves. Over time, the body begins to anticipate this state. It recognizes the early signals of strain and responds not by enduring, but by seeking the familiar softening. The ritual shortens. Fewer drops are needed to reach the same effect at first. Then more are required. The drift becomes something to be reached reliably, not occasionally. This learning happens quietly, beneath awareness. The individual believes they are managing stress efficiently. They believe they are preventing collapse. They believe they remain in control. And in a sense, they are of behavior, of appearance, of outward function. But the body has begun to offload work it once performed unaided. The nervous system recalibrates. Calm is no longer the baseline from which strain departs. It is the state to which one returns only with assistance. Without ether, the body feels slightly misaligned, subtly overexposed, not ill, just uncomfortably awake. This is the drift's most deceptive quality. It does not announce loss. It simply redefines normal. Victorian culture, with its emphasis on restraint, offers no language for this change. There is no vocabulary for dependency that does not resemble vice, and ether bears none of vice's visible marks. The individual continues to fulfill duties, to host, to attend, to converse. There is no collapse to observe, no scandal to correct. Doctors, if consulted, hear reports of success. The patient sleeps better. Nervous symptoms are controlled. The remedy appears effective. The body's learning goes unnoticed, its adaptation unmeasured. Christmas seasons pass, each one reinforcing the lesson. The body remembers that the most demanding weeks were survived through drifting. It remembers that relief arrived without consequence. it begins to expect the same ease in lesser trials. Soon, drifting is not reserved for holidays. It appears on ordinary evenings after modest exertion. It is summoned before discomfort becomes obvious. The body, having learned the path, takes it willingly. There is a cost, though it remains difficult to articulate. Sensation flattens, emotional contrast diminishes. Joy does not disappear, but it arrives muted, less insistent. Sadness does the same. Life becomes smoother, but thinner. The individual may sense this thinning, but misinterpret it as maturity, composure, refinement. After all, excess feeling has always been discouraged. The ability to remain untroubled is praised. Ether appears to assist virtue rather than erode it. Yet the drift deepens. The body grows less tolerant of full sensation. Presence without assistance feels raw, almost abrasive. The world seems louder than it should be, sharper than necessary. Ether has not harmed the body in any dramatic way. It has simply taught it to prefer distance. And preference, once established, is difficult to reverse. The body that learns to drift does not forget how to return, but it increasingly resists doing so unaided. What was once an occasional reprieve has become a learned response, a quiet adaptation that reshapes endurance itself. No one names this transformation. It unfolds too gently, too politely. But within it lies the beginning of dependence, not born of excess, but of refinement, not driven by escape, but by the desire to remain composed in a world that demands it without pause. At first, the breath is measured, a brief inhalation, taken only when the day has stretched too long or the evening refuses to settle. Ether is still regarded as an aid, not a necessity. Its use is deliberate, restrained, framed as a choice rather than a need. The cloth is lifted, the vapor drawn in lightly, and the moment passes. But the body remembers the distance it provides. As weeks turn into months, the breath lengthens almost without notice. The cloth lingers closer to the face. The pause extends. What was once enough no longer quite reaches the same calm. The drift arrives more slowly now, requiring patience, insistence. The body, having learned the path, expects the destination to feel familiar. This change is subtle, easily justified. Winter nights are longer, fatigue accumulates, Christmas obligations have only recently loosened their grip. Sleep, once coaxed gently, now resists arrival. Ether feels appropriate, even prudent, when rest refuses to come. Night after night, the ritual repeats. The house grows quiet. Candles are extinguished, curtains drawn. In the solitude of the bedroom, the handkerchief reappears. The breath is deeper now, held a moment longer. The vapor settles, and the mind recedes into its accustomed calm. Sleep follows, but it is altered. Dreams grow indistinct. Rest feels lighter, less restorative. Morning brings wakefulness without freshness, a lingering dullness that dissipates slowly. The individual does not connect this sensation to the previous night's relief. Instead, they attribute it to the season, to age, to the ordinary wear of life. Evening returns, and with it, the familiar restlessness. The body, no longer fully satisfied by unassisted rest, anticipates intervention. Ether is not yet craved, but expected. It has become part of the night's architecture, as routine as locking the door or lowering the lamp. Doctors, when consulted, remain unconcerned. Sleep has improved, they are told. The patient rests more easily than before. There is no visible distress, no alarming symptom. The remedy appears to be doing its work. No one asks how much is being used, or how often. Moderation, once advised, is assumed. The longer breath becomes normalized. It is no longer noticed as change. The ritual has smoothed itself into habit, invisible through repetition. Each night feels like an isolated decision, justified by the day that preceded it. There is no sense of accumulation, no awareness of progression. Yet the body is progressing all the same. It has adjusted its expectations of rest. Sleep without ether begins to feel shallow, unsettled. The mind grows impatient with wakefulness, intolerant of the small discomforts once endured without complaint. Ether promises efficiency. Why struggle when calm can be summoned? This reasoning feels practical, not indulgent. Victorian culture prizes order, routine, and control. A nightly practice that ensures rest aligns with these values. There is no shame in seeking assistance when it improves function. The longer breath is framed as maintenance, not excess. Still, the effect deepens. Emotional responsiveness dulls further. Mornings feel slightly unreal, as though experienced through glass. The sharpness of sensation does not return fully, even after hours of wakefulness. Life continues, but with less texture, less immediacy. The individual may notice this thinning but dismiss it. Composure has always required sacrifice. Feeling less intensely is often mistaken for stability. Ether's influence is subtle enough to hide behind these assumptions. Night after night, the breath lengthens. The body settles more quickly, but it also wakes less completely. The distance once reserved for moments of crisis now envelops the quiet hours of rest. What began as a means to endure the season has become the means to endure each day. There is no single moment when concern arises, no clear line crossed. The longer breath arrives gradually, as habits do by repetition rather than intention. And because it unfolds in silence, in darkness, behind closed doors, it escapes notice. Yet in these nightly rituals, something important has shifted. Rest is no longer restorative on its own. Calm is no longer a state that emerges naturally. The body has learned to rely on the vapor that first appeared as a seasonal kindness. A longer breath each night does not feel like dependence. It feels like adjustment. But it is here, in these quiet hours, that ether's hold tightens most securely, wrapped in routine, sanctioned by success, and mistaken for nothing more than a sensible way to sleep. There comes a night when the ritual fails. The house is quiet, the lamps dimmed, the corridors stilled into their familiar hush. The handkerchief is folded, the vial returned to its place. The body lies waiting for the descent it has come to expect, the soft loosening, the gentle drift into rest. But the silence stretches on, unbroken. Sleep does not arrive. At first, this is dismissed as anomaly, an unsettled evening. Too much conversation earlier, perhaps. A mind unwilling to release the day. The individual remains patient, confident that rest will come if allowed its time. Yet the minutes lengthen. The stillness grows heavy rather than soothing. Without ether, the body feels exposed. Sensations once muted return abruptly. The ticking of a clock becomes insistent. The pressure of bedding against skin feels unfamiliar, almost intrusive. Thoughts move too quickly, colliding rather than settling. The calm that once arrived so readily now feels distant, withheld. This wakefulness carries a new quality, not merely alertness, but agitation. The nervous system, accustomed to assistance, resists unassisted descent into rest. It waits for the intervention it has learned to expect. When none arrives, it protests. The individual tries to reason with the body. Sleep has come naturally before. It will come again. Yet doubt creeps in alongside fatigue. The silence of the room no longer comforts. It amplifies awareness. Every breath feels shallow. Every movement is registered too sharply. By morning, exhaustion lingers like residue. The night has passed without restoration, leaving the body brittle, the mind irritable. This fatigue is different from ordinary tiredness. It carries an edge of unease, a sense that something has gone wrong. The day unfolds under this strain. Concentration wavers. Sounds irritate. Social obligations feel heavier than usual. The memory of last night's wakefulness presses insistently. The individual begins to anticipate the coming evening with apprehension rather than relief. When night returns, the decision feels inevitable. The handkerchief reappears, the breath is drawn, the familiar softening arrives, and with it, sleep. Relief floods in not only because rest follows, but because the body recognizes the return of order. This contrast leaves a mark. Sleeplessness without ether becomes something to be avoided, not endured. The silence that once signaled rest now signals threat avoid, in which the body flounders without guidance. Ether is no longer simply helpful, it has become the gatekeeper to sleep itself. Doctors, if told, hear only that sleep has been restored. The details of the sleepless night are omitted or minimized. What matters is that the remedy works. The pattern wakefulness in its absence, rest in its presence goes unexamined. Over time, these nights multiply. Each attempt to sleep unaided ends in restlessness. Each return to ether confirms its necessity. The body learns the association with increasing certainty. Silence no longer invites rest, it demands intervention. This shift alters the experience of night entirely. Bedtime becomes a negotiation rather than a release. Calm must be induced, not awaited. The natural ebb of consciousness feels unreliable, insufficient. Ether stands in as guarantor. There is fear in this realization, though it remains unspoken. The individual senses a narrowing of options, a dependence on a specific ritual to achieve something once effortless. Yet fear is quickly soothed by relief. The solution is at hand. Why dwell on the problem? Victorian culture offers no framework for discussing such unease. Dependence is associated with excess and visible ruin, neither of which applies here. Life continues uninterrupted. Duties are fulfilled. Appearances remain intact. But the nights tell a quieter story. In the hours when the house should cradle rest, the body waits anxiously for silence to be filled with vapor. Sleep, once a natural companion, now arrives only when summoned chemically. Sleeplessness after silence becomes the clearest sign of change, not dramatic, not public, but deeply personal. It reveals the cost of borrowed calm, the way assistance reshapes expectation. And though the day conceals it well, the night remembers. In the darkness, with no audience to reassure and no performance to sustain, the body confronts what it has learned. Rest has been outsourced, calm has been conditioned, and the silence, once a friend, now demands payment before it will give anything back. When the decorations are taken down and the city exhales, Christmas is meant to loosen its grip. The garlands dry and are discarded. The silver returns to cupboards. Cards are cleared from mantles, their sentiments folded away with the season itself. Ordinary time resumes. That, at least, is the expectation. For some, it does not. The body does not recognize the calendar's authority. It remembers only the conditions under which it learned to endure. During the weeks of celebration, ether became the instrument by which strain was softened and nights were negotiated. Relief arrived reliably, and the body recorded the method with care. When January comes, the body does not release that lesson. It carries it forward. At first, the continuation feels reasonable. Winter remains, days are short, evenings long. The fatigue of the season lingers. A breath at night seems justified, while the cold persists and the light remains scarce. Ether is still framed as seasonal aid, merely extending its usefulness a little longer. But the line between season and habit blurs quickly. The body, having adapted to assisted calm, does not easily return to unassisted endurance. Minor stresses once tolerated without comment now provoke the same internal agitation that Christmas once did. Social engagements feel louder than they should. Responsibilities press more sharply. Restlessness appears with less provocation. Ether, having proven its effectiveness, offers a familiar solution. The handkerchief reappears, not for celebration, but for ordinary evenings. The breath is taken not in anticipation of guests, but in response to the day itself. Relief arrives, confirming the wisdom of the choice. The holiday, it seems, has not ended, it has simply changed shape. What was once an exception becomes a pattern. The body responds to discomfort with expectation rather than endurance. Calm is no longer something that unfolds naturally after effort, it is something summoned. Ether's role shifts from support to requirement without ever announcing the transition. There is no single moment when concern should arise. No dramatic escalation marks the change. Life continues outwardly unchanged. Work is performed. Social obligations are met. Sleep arrives so long as the ritual is observed. The absence of disruption disguises the permanence taking root beneath it. Families notice little. The individual remains composed, functional, agreeable. If anything, they seem steadier than before. The visible signs of strain have been erased. No one asks what sustains this calm now that the season has passed. Doctors, too, remain unaware. The prescription was for winter nerves, and winter lingers. Improvement has been reported. The remedy appears successful. There is no incentive to revisit assumptions that have delivered such tidy results. Yet internally, the relationship has shifted. Ether is no longer associated with celebration or exception. It has become part of the ordinary architecture of coping. Evenings feel incomplete without it. Nights feel uncertain. The body anticipates the drift as it once anticipated rest. This anticipation brings subtle anxiety, not panic, but unease. The individual begins to organize their routines around access to the remedy. Travel is planned carefully. Social engagements are evaluated not by enjoyment, but by whether the ritual can be maintained afterward. These considerations remain private, easily rationalized. The language of seasons no longer applies. The relief that once belonged to Christmas now belongs to everything. Stress is no longer contextual, it is generalized. Ether becomes the answer to a world that feels perpetually demanding, perpetually loud. And so the holiday extends itself invisibly, not in decoration or ritual, but in expectation. The body continues to behave as though it is December bracing for strain, preparing for endurance, reaching for assistance before difficulty can fully emerge. What was meant to be temporary has become structural. Christmas taught the body how to survive by drifting, and the lesson proved too useful to forget. The season has ended, but the method remains. The holiday that never ends is not marked by lights or music. It is marked by repetition, by nightly rituals carried forward without question, by a calm that arrives only when summoned, and beneath it all, by a quiet realization that the distance once borrowed for celebration has become the default state for living itself. The calendar insists it is over. The body disagrees. In Victorian society, the feminine ideal is defined not by strength, but by smoothness. A woman is praised not for resilience, but for her ability to remain undisturbed. Grace is measured by how little effort it appears to require. Emotion must be present enough to soften manners, but never so present that it demands accommodation. The ideal woman feels quietly. Ether aligns itself seamlessly with this expectation. From the beginning, its use among women is framed as corrective rather than indulgent. A lady who inhales ether is not escaping responsibility. She is preserving propriety. The vapor assists her in becoming what society already expects her to be: calm, attentive, agreeable, and untroubled by the visible cost of endurance. Medical discourse reinforces this alignment. Women are described as particularly susceptible to nervous disturbance, their constitutions more responsive to stimulation, their emotional lives more easily unsettled. This supposed fragility is not questioned, it is assumed. Ether is offered as the logical response, a modern intervention designed to stabilize what nature has rendered delicate. In practice, this means that women are introduced to ether earlier and more consistently than men. A young woman struggling with holiday fatigue is offered relief without hesitation. A mother overwhelmed by domestic demands receives the same advice. The remedy is normalized within the rhythms of female life, framed as assistance rather than exception. What is striking is how quickly ether becomes entwined with virtue. A woman who uses it discreetly appears more composed, more reliable, more pleasant. Her calm is praised, her steadiness admired. The chemical assistance behind it remains invisible and therefore irrelevant. Society rewards the result, not the means. This creates a quiet incentive. Women learn that emotional regulation is not merely expected, it is rewarded. Ether becomes a tool for meeting that expectation efficiently. It allows them to absorb pressure without complaint, to smooth over discomfort without disruption. The ideal is achieved not through rest or reprieve, but through controlled detachment. Over time, this detachment reshapes identity. Emotional responses that once felt natural begin to feel excessive. Irritation, sadness, even joy are moderated before they can surface fully. Ether does not erase feeling, but it narrows its range, trimming away what might inconvenience others. This narrowing is praised as maturity. Families reinforce it without realizing. A daughter who remains calm through long gatherings is held up as exemplary. A wife who no longer retreats early from social obligations is admired for her stamina. Ether's role remains unspoken, folded into the broader narrative of improvement and growth. The cost of this alignment is subtle but profound. Women begin to mistrust their own sensations. Discomfort is no longer a signal to rest or withdraw. It is a symptom to be treated. Emotional fluctuation is framed as instability rather than response. Ether becomes the mediator between self and expectation, smoothing away anything that does not fit. Christmas intensifies this dynamic, but it does not create it. The season merely reveals how thoroughly the feminine ideal depends on quiet endurance. Ether offers a way to fulfill that ideal without visible struggle, making it especially appealing and especially dangerous. Because its use enhances compliance rather than rebellion, it attracts no scrutiny. A woman who becomes quieter, steadier, less reactive, is not seen as altered, but improved. Ether's influence is mistaken for character refinement. Yet beneath this refinement, something essential recedes. The ability to respond fully, to feel without moderation, to register one's own limits, these begin to fade. Ether teaches women to prioritize appearance over experience, harmony over honesty, calm over awareness. The feminine ideal absorbs this lesson easily. It has always demanded containment. Ether simply provides the means to achieve it more consistently. And so the vapor drifts through parlors and bedrooms alike, not as a threat to propriety, but as its ally. It shapes women into the image society prefers: composed, accommodating, quietly distant, while eroding the space in which authentic feeling might have been acknowledged. What is lost is not immediately visible. There is no rebellion, no collapse, no scandal, only a gradual thinning of interior life, mistaken for grace. And in that mistake, ether secures its place, not merely as a remedy, but as a quiet architect of the feminine ideal itself. In the households of Victorian High Society, men hold authority as a matter of course, their opinions shaping routines and expectations alike. Yet the holiday season reveals a peculiar tension. While they are tasked with guiding the household, they are largely shielded from the subtler strains that accumulate behind closed doors. The women manage appearances, the children attend quietly, and men are expected to observe composure without disruption. They reward calm with approval, but rarely inquire into its source. Ether enters this equation as a silent mediator. The gentleman sees composure and assumes effort, but never recognizes intervention. A wife who moves gracefully from one gathering to another, her smile steady, her posture assured, is perceived as naturally enduring. The relief she experiences is attributed to fortitude, not vapor. Courtesy obliges the men to accept this display without question, preserving appearances while concealing method. The same principle applies to sons and fathers alike. Young men are taught to admire resilience and reward it with respect. They note when mothers and sisters maintain equilibrium amid fatigue, but they rarely question the mechanism. It is socially unthinkable to inquire too closely. To do so would imply a suspicion that composure might be manufactured, that the delicate performance might be assisted chemically. This blind courtesy reinforces ether's utility. The absence of inquiry allows ritual use to persist unremarked. A bottle on a bedside table, a cloth in a drawer, a brief inhalation behind a curtain, these are invisible to the male gaze. Their invisibility is their protection, and the men's polite disinterest serves as unwitting sanction. A household can continue its performances uninterrupted. Men's engagement is further shaped by social expectation. They are to participate fully in gatherings, maintaining cheer and civility, yet remain largely oblivious to the subtle labor required of others. Their own sense of composure is untested. They are spectators of discipline rather than subjects of intervention. This dynamic allows ether to operate without challenge, as the efforts it eases are hidden from evaluation. Occasionally, small anomalies arise. A slight paleness at the table, a brief hesitation in conversation, but these are easily rationalized. Fatigue, mood, or distraction suffice as explanations. No one speaks aloud of vapor or ritual. Curiosity is deflected by assumption, a gentle sigh, a turn of the topic, a nod toward propriety. Courtesy closes inquiry as effectively as the handkerchief conceals the cloth. The subtle power of this system is remarkable. Men reward appearance, and the household delivers it. The body learns to anticipate this reward. Calm is reinforced because it is praised, yet the means remain secret. Ether's influence grows precisely because it aligns with social incentives. It smooths the edges of expectation while remaining invisible to oversight. During Christmas gatherings, this dynamic is amplified. The pressures of performance increase, but so does the value placed on composure. The man of the house admires his wife's steadiness, praises her grace, and moves on, unaware that her endurance is chemically supported. Sons learn from example, absorbing the lesson that outward poise is virtue, regardless of the hidden costs. Over time, these patterns become institutionalized. Ether use is quietly normalized across households. Men observe results, not method. Courtesy becomes complicit, reinforcing habit. Intervention is invisible, reward is visible, and no one questions the balance. Yet beneath the surface, the lesson is subtle but profound. The household learns that composure can be achieved without effort, that calm can be summoned, and that appearances can be preserved even when the inner self is strained. Ether's presence is undetected, its effect unremarkable, and its hold secure. In this way, husbands, fathers, and sons, through polite blindness and unquestioned courtesy, become unwitting participants in the quiet transformation of the domestic sphere. They uphold appearances while sanctioning reliance, ensuring that the chemical ally remains unchallenged and that the delicate performance of the season continues uninterrupted year after year. In Victorian High Society, appearance is everything, and the machinery of respectability operates with precision. Every gesture, every expression, every measured word contributes to the intricate balance that separates propriety from impropriety. Composure is prized above all else, for it signals virtue, self-control, and mastery over circumstance. Yet behind these polished facades, the true labor of maintaining dignity often goes unnoticed, even by those who benefit most from it. Ether, in this delicate equilibrium, functions as an unseen instrument. It does not announce itself. It leaves no stain upon reputation. It neither betrays the household nor disrupts the performance of the individual. The calm it provides is seamless, appearing to emerge naturally, as though the nerves themselves have corrected, unaided, to meet the demands of social expectation. The women of the house are the primary beneficiaries. They glide through rooms filled with conversation, laughter, and expectation, moving gracefully from guest to guest. Their composure is applauded, their attentiveness admired, and their patience rewarded. No one suspects the source of this steadiness. Ether remains invisible. Its presence is felt only in the subtle reduction of tension, the softening of agitation, the faint smoothness of expression. The household perceives not intervention, but perfection. Men, observing this poise, assume innate endurance. The mother, the wife, the daughter, these figures embody the ideal of calm refinement. Their labor, already expected to be discreet, is rendered nearly miraculous by the chemical veil that facilitates it. Yet the observers are largely unaware, shielded by their own assumptions and by social norms that discourage inquiry into private rituals. Courtesy itself preserves the secrecy, for to question the source of composure would be both improper and unnecessary. The structure of respectability thus becomes self-reinforcing. Calm is rewarded, and because it is perceived as natural, the individual continues to seek it. The body, accustomed to the ease provided by ether, begins to anticipate its presence. The rhythm of life adjusts imperceptibly. Nights of rest are expected to include intervention. Days of social engagement are tolerated more smoothly, with preparation already in place. The chemical aid blends seamlessly with etiquette, reinforcing the illusion that composure is entirely the product of character. This invisible support system spreads quietly, shaping domestic life in ways no observer can fully recognize. Guests notice only that the household functions without strain. They admire the grace with which conversation proceeds, the punctuality of meals, the steadiness of hosts and hostesses alike. They are blind to the method, and in their blindness, they sanction it. Respectability, in this sense, requires no awareness of the mechanisms that sustain it. It flourishes because of concealment, not in spite of it. Yet the consequences accumulate. Calm is achieved, yes, but not wholly earned. Composure becomes inseparable from intervention. Emotional range narrows. Sensation is filtered through expectation. The individual perceives less of fatigue, irritation, or anxiety, but also less of spontaneous joy, surprise, or sorrow. Life, experienced through the lens of propriety and chemical assistance, grows simultaneously manageable and muted. By the close of the season, the household has survived intact. Appearances are preserved, duties fulfilled, social obligations met. But beneath the polish of manners, the body and mind have learned to rely on unseen support. Respectability has been maintained without awareness, not merely of those who observe, but of those who endure. The skill of composure, once an achievement of will and discipline, is quietly intertwined with chemical facilitation. Ether's success lies in this invisibility. It does not alarm. It does not interfere with judgment. It leaves no trace. In a society devoted to appearances, this is sufficient. The household continues year after year, each member performing the roles demanded by expectation, each relying, increasingly, on the silent ally that ensures their poise. In this manner, Victorian Christmases pass with dignity intact, even as the very mechanisms of that dignity remain hidden, unexamined, and unquestioned. The first visible signs of strain are never dramatic. They arrive in whispers, in subtle shifts that can be dismissed if observed too briefly. A finger that trembles at the edge of a silver tray, a wrist that flexes too often, adjusting the weight of a teacup, eyes that flutter, catching light differently than before. These tremors appear beneath lace gloves, hidden from casual view, easily rationalized as fatigue or excitement. but they mark the earliest evidence that calm is no longer entirely natural. For women of Victorian high society, gloves serve as both adornment and armor. They conceal, smooth, and flatten what might otherwise betray effort or emotion. A perfectly poised hand is interpreted as composure. A hand that quivers imperceptibly remains unnoticed by all but the most attentive observer. The tremor, small as it is, signals a body learning to accommodate pressure chemically rather than physically. These tremors coincide with moments of heightened demand. A gathering has lasted too long, a conversation has become taxing. Music or laughter presses insistently against delicate nerves. The body reacts, subtly, beneath the surface. Muscle fibers twitch, fingers shift with more frequency. A pulse quickens in ways the heart cannot mask entirely. Yet, etiquette forbids acknowledgement. The gloves must remain smooth, the posture unbroken, the face calm. Appearance must prevail. Ether, introduced carefully and discreetly, provides the solution. A brief inhalation behind the curtain or in the privacy of the boudoir quiets the tremor. The muscles relax, the pulse slows, composure returns. The effect appears immediate, miraculous even, and entirely invisible. No one notices the intervention, only the restored calm is perceived. The tremor disappears as though it had never existed, leaving behind the impression of flawless endurance. This concealment reinforces reliance. The body registers that calm can be restored without exertion. The mind notes that performance, previously maintained through effort and self-discipline, can be achieved more efficiently. Tremors are now signals rather than failures. They indicate when the vapor is needed, guiding the next inhalation with precision. What once required patience and endurance now requires only anticipation. Men, observing these households, remain oblivious. Courtesy prevents inquiry. The elegance of the gloves, the smooth sweep of a sleeve, the measured placement of a hand on a teacup, these confirm all assumptions of poise. The tremors, masked and corrected, escape notice entirely. Their invisibility becomes their protection, and the social environment sanctions their presence by ignoring it. Over weeks and seasons, the tremors themselves teach the body. It learns to anticipate strain and to cue intervention before collapse could ever occur. Fingers twitch at the first hints of fatigue. Pulse quickens at the first stirrings of agitation. The body has internalized the rhythm of relief. Calm is no longer fully organic. It is conditioned, chemically assisted, and socially reinforced. The subtlety of these tremors makes them uniquely insidious. There is no crisis to provoke reflection, no dramatic failure to demand intervention. Life continues outwardly uninterrupted. Social obligations are met. Appearances remain intact. Yet beneath the lace, the hands, the fabric of propriety, a quiet transformation unfolds. The body has learned to drift, to require aid, and to anticipate its absence. The holiday season continues, glittering and immaculate on the surface, but beneath each glove lies a hidden ledger of reliance. Tremors beneath lace gloves are the first whispers of a pattern that will only deepen with repetition. A subtle herald of the quiet dominion ether has begun to exercise over the rhythms of Victorian endurance. By the third or fourth season of repeated indulgence, the effects of ether are no longer confined to the visible tremors beneath lace gloves or the whispered ritual behind closed doors. Something more profound begins to emerge. A subtle thinning of feeling, a quiet flattening of the emotional landscape. Victorian high society prizes composure, but even the most disciplined demeanor cannot conceal the internal erosion of sensation that accompanies reliance on chemical calm. At first, the change is almost imperceptible. Laughter carries a slightly muted tone, joy appears less effusive, and moments that might once have elicited delight pass with only faint recognition. Grief, irritation, or frustration once sharply felt arrive diluted, filtered through the protective veil that ether has provided so reliably. The body responds predictably to pressure, but the mind no longer registers its full weight. This emotional thinning is reinforced by the culture itself. Women are instructed, implicitly and explicitly, to moderate expression. Men are trained to reward appearance rather than authenticity. Etiquette prizes restraint over spontaneity. Ether, with its quiet smoothing of the nervous system, aligns seamlessly with these expectations. It does not distort behavior in a socially unacceptable way. It simply diminishes intensity. What is considered refinement becomes, in effect, chemical management. Victorian households remain outwardly intact. Christmas dinners proceed without incident. Conversation flows politely. Guests admire the steadiness of their hosts and hostesses. But beneath this polished exterior, experience itself is subtly altered. The highs are lower, the lows less pronounced. Life continues to be observed and performed according to social expectation, but it is increasingly mediated by a chemical buffer that dulls sensation just enough to prevent disruption. For those within the household, the change is difficult to name. They attribute their muted reactions to maturity, to refinement, to the proper exercise of self-control. Few suspect that something tangible has shifted. The body has learned to expect assistance, and the mind interprets that assistance as the normal baseline for feeling. Emotional range narrows without conscious recognition. The vapor that once offered temporary respite now dictates the boundaries of acceptable experience. This thinning has consequences beyond the individual. Relationships are subtly reshaped. Interactions with family, friends, and suitors proceed with greater predictability, but also with less depth. Intimacy is mediated. Affection is measured. Disagreement, once lively and engaged, becomes polite negotiation rather than passionate exchange. The social fabric appears unbroken, yet its fibers have been quietly altered. Even the most attentive physicians are unlikely to recognize the change. Their focus is on overt nervous distress, on sleeplessness, on agitation. Emotional subtlety escapes clinical measurement, yet the pattern is reinforced night after night, season after season, each repetition solidifying the thinning effect. The house remains calm, but the inhabitants feel less fully themselves. Christmas, with its dense social obligations and heightened expectations, accelerates this process. The demands of performance, combined with chemical facilitation, teach the body and mind that feeling fully is optional, even inconvenient. Calm becomes preferable to intensity. Distance is mistaken for composure. And so, emotional thinning spreads quietly, beneath the gleam of polished silver, the warmth of pine-scented rooms, and the polite laughter of gathered guests. It leaves no immediate mark, no scandal to provoke intervention. Only a subtle change in how life is experienced, fewer peaks, fewer valleys, a softer, smoother rhythm that ensures appearance is maintained, even as the internal landscape recedes. In this way, the High Society Christmas, once a test of endurance, transforms into a mechanism for shaping sensation itself. Emotional richness is sacrificed for control. Intensity is trimmed for decorum, and beneath the gaslight and glitter, the invisible influence of ether takes hold not in crisis or spectacle, but in the quiet, relentless thinning of what it means to feel. The room is brilliantly lit, polished to a high gleam, yet, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the scent of fresh pine, something essential has begun to fade. Christmas unfolds with all the familiar trappings, silver trays, heavy with sweetmeats, carolers' voices floating through frost-edged windows, the murmur of conversation balanced delicately between warmth and decorum. But the hearts of those within beat with a muted rhythm. The season, once sharp with excitement, is now softened into a veneer of sensation, experienced yet diminished. For women of the house, trained in propriety and aided by ether, This change is particularly pronounced. Each laugh is measured, each sigh calculated, each glance steady despite internal fatigue. They move among guests, attending to every expectation with grace, yet the joy they express is less immediate, less spontaneous than in seasons past. Pleasure is present, but filtered. Affection is offered, yet tempered. The exhilaration of anticipation, the sharp thrill of delight, has been quietly replaced by a regulated calm. The body, conditioned through repeated exposure to chemical aid, demands these adjustments. Moments that would once have elicited natural reaction now trigger a learned moderation. A gift received produces polite approval, rather than genuine surprise. Music that might once have inspired shivers of delight passes with only a slight smile. Even the warmth of family, the soft pressing of hands or the shared glance of understanding, is experienced through a subtle buffer that tempers intensity without revealing its presence. Men, observing these households, remain largely oblivious. They see composure, elegance, and grace. They commend endurance and decorum, but the true texture of feeling goes unnoticed. The subtle flattening of emotion is invisible, concealed by etiquette, and reinforced by the very chemical assistance that ensures outward perfection. Courtesy itself becomes complicity, sanctioning a diminished interior life while rewarding its display. Children, too, perceive the shift without comprehension. The sparkle of Christmas morning is measured, joy bounded by restraint. They learn, silently, that delight should be moderated, that excitement is to be contained, that performance matters more than unfiltered feeling. Ether, though hidden, has now influenced generations, shaping the way sensation itself is experienced. Even the household staff, accustomed to the rhythms of service, notices the difference. Tasks that would once have been enlivened by spirited interaction proceed with subdued precision. The usual laughter, occasional argument, or expressive exclamation is rare, smoothed away by an atmosphere of controlled calm. The entire home becomes a stage upon which sensation is muted, polished, and rendered safe. Doctors continue to endorse ether with their quiet authority. Their focus remains on overt signs of distress, agitation, sleeplessness, trembling. The internal flattening of emotion escapes measurement, escapes comment, and escapes concern. Relief is reported, calm is achieved, the subtle cost is unacknowledged. And so, Christmas proceeds without collapse, yet also without its true intensity. The season is observed, the rituals performed, the obligations met, yet beneath the surface, the richness of experience, the raw thrill, the unexpected joy, the full arc of human response has been curtailed. Pleasure exists, but it is softened. Anticipation is felt, but blunted. Even the small shocks of surprise are absorbed and muted before they reach the consciousness fully. This is the quiet power of ether. It preserves function and appearance while subtly reshaping experience. It teaches the body to accept calm as the norm and the mind to equate composure with virtue. The season passes, glittering and orderly. Yet beneath its surface lies a transformed interior. Christmas, without feeling, beautiful, perfect, and quietly diminished, a triumph of restraint over vitality, and a testament to the invisible influence of chemical calm upon the very experience of life. In the course of Victorian life, the doctor is regarded not only as a healer, but as an arbiter of propriety. His authority is both medical and social. He interprets the body, prescribes the remedy, and, in doing so, validates conduct. Yet even he can be blind to the quiet transformations unfolding beneath the surface. By the time the first signs of dependency manifest, he often notices only after the pattern has been well established. Initially, visits are routine. Patients describe fatigue, irritability, or mild agitation, framed carefully within the language of propriety. The doctor, trusting in observation, prescribes ether sparingly, an occasional aid, a temporary reprieve. The doses are modest, the instructions precise. Relief arrives, composure is restored, and both patient and physician are satisfied. The system appears functional, even exemplary. Seasons pass, the holiday demands recur with clockwork regularity, and so too does the use of ether. Each application reinforces calm, each breath retrains the nerves. The patient appears untroubled, alert, and graceful, exactly the outcome the physician had intended. There is no crisis, no visible decline, no failure to alarm. It is a textbook success. Yet, beneath this appearance, subtle shifts accumulate. Tremors beneath lace gloves, quiet, thinning of emotion, delayed fatigue. These signs are present, but inconspicuous. The body anticipates intervention before discomfort peaks. Emotional intensity is muted. Sensation is mediated chemically before it can manifest socially. The household remains orderly. The rituals of Christmas continue flawlessly. The doctor, reviewing his notes and consulting with colleagues, sees only confirmation of efficacy. Recognition comes too late, often only when deviation from the norm becomes undeniable. Perhaps a patient arrives pale and hollow-eyed despite routine compliance. Perhaps tremors are visible even through gloves, or composure begins to falter during ordinary conversation. Perhaps emotional response is flattened to a degree that draws comment. It is then that the physician begins to suspect a deeper pattern, one overlooked because the external measures, behavior, attendance, punctuality, remained impeccable for so long. At this point, concern is constrained. Advice for moderation is offered, cautions are suggested, but the subtle internal recalibration has already taken root. The body has learned to rely on ether. The mind has internalized the expectation of intervention. Even when usage is reduced, the thresholds of sensation have shifted. Normal response now feels extreme, almost intolerable. The doctor can warn, prescribe, and advise, but he cannot undo the lessons the body has quietly recorded over repeated seasons. This delay in recognition is compounded by social factors. Households, proud of their composure, rarely admit reliance. They emphasize the absence of outward failure rather than the presence of internal dependence. Observers, including physicians, accept appearances as truth. The very culture that prizes restraint and propriety conceals the subtleties of adaptation. Ether's influence spreads unnoticed because decorum shields it. By the time the doctor notices, the pattern is entrenched. Christmas, once a temporary context for occasional intervention, has become the template for daily life. Calm is expected, and ether is the instrument by which it is delivered. Attempts to restrain its use are met with subtle resistance, not rebellion, but a body conditioned to anticipate and rely upon chemical assistance. The physician, having arrived too late to prevent subtle transformation, must reconcile success with oversight. His prescriptions have delivered composure, yet the price remains hidden. The household functions beautifully, but the interior experience of its members is altered. Emotional range is muted, endurance is outsourced, and calm is mediated chemically. What was once a temporary aid has become an unspoken necessity. Thus, in Victorian High Society, the doctor who notices too late becomes an unwitting chronicler of subtle dependency. He witnesses the triumph of propriety while remaining largely blind to the quiet erosion beneath it. By the time awareness dawns, the patterns of ritual, reliance, and chemical assistance are already woven into the fabric of domestic life, leaving him to wonder whether success can ever truly be measured by appearances alone. Evening descends over Victorian homes with the weight of expectation. Candles flicker in polished candelabras, casting delicate shadows over tables set with the season's finest silver and china. The aroma of roast meats and spiced puddings fills the air, mingling with the scent of pine and waxed floors. Guests are seated, conversation flows in measured tones, and the performance of propriety reaches its apex. Yet beneath the surface, small fissures are beginning to show. Whispered concerns are the first indication, not openly voiced, not acknowledged in full, but hinted at in pauses and glances. A sister leans closer to a mother, murmuring questions about fatigue or pallor. A friend casts a brief glance at a hostess whose smile falters for an imperceptible instant. Words are chosen cautiously, syllables measured. To speak too plainly would disrupt the performance, to ignore the signs would be unkind. The whispers hover at the edges of attention, neither fully formed accusation nor confirmed fact. Ether, having been introduced quietly, mediates these tensions. The affected individual excuses herself briefly, disappears behind a curtain, or retreats to a private corner. A breath is drawn from the familiar cloth. A momentary pause restores steadiness, and the ritual is complete. She returns to the table, appearing untroubled. Conversation resumes. The brief tremor is erased, leaving only the illusion of effortless endurance. These whispered concerns, however, are rarely ignored entirely by the body. The tension that drew them forth has not disappeared. It has been temporarily mollified. The subtle signals, pulse, muscle tension, shallow breathing, persist beneath the outward calm. Ether provides a buffer, but the body remembers the strain. Each intervention reinforces the pattern. When fatigue or agitation arises, relief can be summoned without acknowledgement, without consequence. The whispers at dinner, though discreet, mark the earliest recognition that the calm is not wholly natural. Family members and guests interpret the results in the terms available to them. They see composure restored, attention focused, conversation maintained. The brief faltering is dismissed as momentary, the sigh overlooked, the pale cheek attributed to candlelight or winter chill. Courtesy dictates silence. To inquire further would risk social awkwardness, perhaps even embarrassment. The household collectively maintains the facade, reinforcing reliance upon ether while never naming it. Over successive dinners, the whispers grow in subtle frequency, even as their volume remains low. They no longer question propriety, but hint at endurance. A cautionary glance, a gentle nudge of attention, a soft inquiry phrased as concern for comfort. The pattern becomes evident, if only to those willing to perceive it. Calm is maintained chemically, composure is purchased, and the body is being trained to anticipate relief. Men in the household, observing these evenings, continue to reward appearances rather than probe methods. They note steadiness, praise grace, and move on. Their silence, polite and unknowing, legitimizes the practice. The very social structures that uphold refinement also conceal its dependencies. Whispered concerns flutter in the margins, acknowledged subtly, but never acted upon fully. Ether's influence spreads undetected because the culture itself prioritizes perception over insight. By the conclusion of each dinner, the ritual is complete, the household's poise restored. Yet the whispers leave traces, tiny echoes of recognition that something is different. The body has learned that calm is available, that reliance is unremarkable, and that appearance matters more than sensation. Emotional subtlety, awareness of strain, and the internal cost of composure are quietly set aside, recorded only in the pattern of ritual and the brief, hushed concerns at dinner. In this way, Victorian Christmas dinners become both stage and laboratory, a place where propriety is performed, relief is administered, and the quiet lessons of chemical mediation are etched invisibly into the rhythm of life. Whispered concerns mark the first acknowledgement that the facade is supported not by endurance alone, but by an invisible, unspoken aid, a truth that remains unspoken. even as its effects shape every gesture, glance, and smile around the table. Ether has a presence that is both insubstantial and insistent. It vanishes from the lungs, evaporates from the cloth, yet leaves a trace in the memory of those who have encountered it. It is a delicate aroma, sweet and faint, barely perceptible unless one is attuned to it. And yet, even as it disappears from the senses, it lingers in the household as a quiet signature of the season, a presence that is invisible, intangible, and yet profoundly formative. During Christmas gatherings, this lingering smell accompanies the rituals of social expectation. The drawing rooms, perfumed with pine and beeswax, carry it alongside the scent of roasted meats and spiced puddings. Guests may not identify it consciously, but their subconscious senses register its subtle influence. There is a faint weight in the air, a hint of something that has smoothed tension, softened nerves, and quieted restless hearts. It signals calm, yet the source remains hidden. For the women who administer ether, the smell serves as reassurance. It is proof of the ritual completed, the breath drawn, the nerves settled. Even after the handkerchief is folded and the vial returned to its drawer, the faint trace remains a reminder that control has been restored. The body recognizes it, even if the mind claims ignorance. Each inhalation leaves behind a shadow of relief that persists longer than the chemical itself. Observers, meanwhile, rarely notice. Men focus on composure, on the steadiness of voice, on the elegance of gesture. Children sense comfort without understanding it, responding to the ease that pervades the household rather than to its source. The staff, accustomed to the rhythms of service, register only that the house functions smoothly, that the hostess is composed, that the household operates without friction. The smell is present, yet unseen, and therefore unremarked. This lingering aroma carries significance beyond the immediate moment. It becomes a marker of expectation. The body, conditioned through repeated exposure, associates the faint sweetness with calm. Fatigue signals, nervous agitation, or emotional fluctuation are tempered automatically by the memory of the scent. Relief becomes anticipatory, and the rituals of inhalation grow more instinctive, more habitual. Even in absence, ether exerts influence. The mere suggestion of its presence can evoke steadiness. A glance at the folded cloth, the sight of the vial in its drawer, or even the memory of the smell guides the body toward composure. The nervous system, having learned its rhythms, begins to anticipate intervention, preparing the self to endure before tension reaches its peak. Victorian society, with its emphasis on discretion, inadvertently reinforces this pattern. There is no discussion of scent, no acknowledgement of chemical aid. The odor that lingers is both invisible and authoritative. It confirms calm while remaining secret. Courtesy ensures silence. Politeness forbids inquiry. Appearance alone is measured, and ether's subtle signature escapes detection. Yet, beneath this elegance, the aroma bears a quiet truth. It signals dependence, even as it facilitates composure. The household operates flawlessly. The drawing rooms hum with polite conversation, and the season appears entirely managed. But the faint, sweet trace of ether is the evidence of an invisible scaffold, supporting the weight of expectation, guiding the body toward calm, and subtly reshaping the experience of Christmas itself. As the candles burn low and the last guests depart, the smell persists in memory and in subtle sensation. It reminds the household that calm has been secured, that composure has been achieved, and that the interior life, though hidden, though unspoken, has been altered. It is a presence without form, a signature without mark, and a whisper that the holiday, for all its glitter and ceremony, is no longer experienced fully without aid. The smell lingers, and with it, the quiet lessons of dependence are carried into the night. Even the most meticulously managed household cannot escape the occasional rupture, however small, in the carefully constructed veneer of Victorian perfection. Amidst the soft glow of gaslight and the polished tables of Christmas dinner, a holiday incident unfolds, a tremor, a stumble, a fleeting lapse in composure that exposes the invisible scaffolding upon which the household's calm depends. It begins almost imperceptibly. A lady reaches for a glass, her hand faltering for a moment longer than custom allows. A gentleman misplaces a note, his brow tightening ever so slightly. These deviations are brief, subtle, and easily overlooked, yet they carry significance for those attuned to the rhythms of the household. Observers may register only a flicker of surprise or concern, dismissing it as fatigue, distraction, or seasonal excitement. But for the participant, the moment is sharp, destabilizing, a reminder of the limits of natural endurance. The ether, as always, is at hand. Behind a closed door, in the quiet of a chamber, the familiar cloth appears. A few measured inhalations restore calm. The tremor subsides, the pulse slows. The mind steadies. When the individual re-enters the drawing room, all traces of imbalance are erased. Conversation resumes seamlessly, the laughter is polished, the movements graceful once more. To onlookers, the incident never occurred. The household remains flawless. Yet the impact is not so easily dismissed by the body or the mind. The incident leaves a subtle imprint, a memory of vulnerability that had been temporarily revealed. The nervous system notes the strain, the fleeting failure of composure, and the relief provided by chemical aid. Each occurrence reinforces a lesson that calm, once fragile, can be summoned at will, but only through the established ritual. The body begins to anticipate such interventions, subtly lowering tolerance for unassisted endurance in the future. Family members may notice something without naming it. A sister observes her sibling's brief tremor and registers concern. A furtive glance exchanged across the table. A spouse perceives a momentary hesitation, a fleeting shift in expression. These are discussed in hushed tones later, carefully couched to preserve propriety. No blame is cast, no alarm is raised. Courtesy dictates discretion. The holiday continues uninterrupted. The social fabric of the household protects the individual from scrutiny, even as the internal pattern is reinforced. Guests, if present, are unaware. Their attention remains on decorum, on conversation, on the smooth progression of ritual. What is seen and what is experienced diverge sharply. The performance is maintained, the internal dependence deepens silently. In subsequent days, the body remembers the incident. The memory is not one of shame, but of instruction. Future tremors are preemptively managed. The handkerchief is ready. The cloth and vial are within reach. Relief is anticipated before strain becomes critical. The nervous system is subtly trained, calibrating expectation to intervention. Christmas, the season that demands endurance, has once again been passed without public collapse. Yet the holiday incident has left its mark. Not on the eyes of others, not on the polished tables or the glinting silver, but within the quiet registers of body and mind. It confirms both the fragility of composure and the necessity of aid. Thus, even the smallest lapse becomes a lesson in dependence. The holiday, outwardly perfect, conceals its cost. Ether restores appearance, smooths the tremor, and ensures propriety, but it also deepens the subtle, invisible network of reliance that has quietly taken root beneath lace, velvet, and candlelight. The incident is brief, discreet, almost forgotten, yet its effects echo long beyond the closing of doors and the extinguishing of flames, shaping the rhythms of experience in the seasons to come. Even under the most careful management, there comes a moment when ether ceases to yield its full effect. The body, having adapted to its presence over repeated seasons, begins to resist in subtle ways. What was once sufficient to smooth tremors, quiet nerves, and restore composure no longer provides the same ease. The patient who has relied upon the vapor finds that calm is no longer immediate, that the drift is delayed, and that nights of rest require greater attention or more of the substance itself. At first, this is rationalized. The season is particularly demanding, the day unusually taxing, or the nerves simply frayed beyond ordinary capacity. Friends and family offer understanding, assuming temporary fatigue rather than a shift in physiology. The household continues its performance. The drawing room remains polished, the table orderly, the conversation precise. No one notices that relief is no longer automatic. The patient experiences subtle frustration. Anxiety, once managed effortlessly, lingers. Sleep, once coaxed without thought, requires repeated effort. Tremors return, despite careful ritual. Emotional responses appear blunted in some moments, exaggerated in others, signaling that the body is learning to demand more. The familiar ease is replaced by a quiet insistence, a reminder that intervention is no longer entirely sufficient. Physicians, if consulted, may adjust instructions with small increases in dose or frequency. Yet, the underlying lesson goes unnoticed. The body has developed expectation, and with expectation comes subtle resistance. Each repeated application reinforces reliance, while simultaneously recalibrating the nervous system, creating a paradox in which more assistance is needed to achieve what was once effortless. The patient cannot improve because improvement now depends on the very mechanism intended to preserve it. The household observes outward composure. The patient moves through social obligations, greets guests, hosts dinners, and participates in holiday rituals with apparent grace. The surface remains smooth. Courtesy and social expectation shield the internal struggle. Tremors, fatigue, and slight agitation are concealed behind polite smiles and carefully arranged gestures. Family members interpret these moments as minor lapses rather than signs of growing dependence. No one questions the necessity of aid because all appearances are intact, yet the patient is acutely aware of the shift. The calm that once arrived predictably now arrives reluctantly. Nights are longer, and the rituals of retreat behind curtains, the careful inhalation of vapor, and the folded handkerchief are repeated with more deliberate precision. Even these measures are no longer fully effective. Each episode leaves a lingering sensation of inadequacy, a quiet awareness that composure must be maintained artificially rather than naturally. This gradual failure teaches another lesson. Dependence cannot be measured by appearance alone. The patient knows the calm is borrowed, the composure chemically assisted, and yet society sees only the outward perfection. The disconnect between appearance and experience becomes the defining feature of daily life. Relief is sought not only to endure the present moment, but to preserve the illusion of enduring without effort. In such a state, Christmas, the season that once served as the context for experimentation, becomes an unending rehearsal. Every social engagement, every dinner, every visit requires meticulous preparation. The patient who will not improve moves through the holidays with grace, but each breath drawn behind closed doors, each inhalation from the familiar cloth, is a quiet admission that natural endurance has eroded. By the conclusion of the season, the lesson is clear. Calm without consequence is no longer guaranteed. Appearance remains intact, but the interior has grown increasingly dependent. The patient has learned that composure is no longer an innate capacity, but a carefully managed performance, one that requires ever more vigilance, preparation, and chemical assistance to sustain. The body is unchanged in form, yet subtly transformed in expectation, teaching that the patient who cannot improve is not failing socially, but quietly surrendering to a system that demands perfection above all else. In Victorian households, silence is more than absence of sound. It is a tool, a shield, and a form of social currency. Behind the flickering glow of gaslight, silence protects the household from scrutiny. It conceals fatigue, masks tremors, and hides the subtle signs of strain that might otherwise attract comment. In the era of strict propriety, what is unspoken carries as much weight as what is articulated, and ether operates within this quiet as both remedy and reinforcement. During the Christmas season, the value of silence is magnified. Drawing rooms hum with conversation and laughter, yet those who rely upon chemical calm often retreat for a moment, absorbing pressure behind closed doors, folding the handkerchief over the familiar cloth, and inhaling the vapor that will restore composure. These pauses are brief, discreet, and carefully timed, designed to avoid observation. When the individual re-enters the gathering, conversation continues seamlessly, and the performance of propriety remains flawless. It is in these silences that protection resides. Tremors beneath lace gloves, pulses accelerated by anticipation, subtle agitation in the mind, all are buffered by the quiet space in which ether is administered. The body, having learned to recognize these moments as safe, relaxes, nerves settle, breath slows, calm is restored. The protective function of silence is reinforced both physiologically and socially. Family members, conditioned by etiquette, rarely inquire too deeply into these absences. A whispered retreat is explained with civility. A visit to the restroom, a check on the children, a moment to arrange the room. Politeness governs response, curiosity is restrained. Social norms demand that appearances are maintained without question, that composure is assumed natural unless profoundly disrupted. In this way, silence becomes a form of consent, an unspoken agreement to overlook the mechanisms that sustain decorum. The protective quality of silence extends beyond immediate observation. Each retreat behind a door, each inhalation from the cloth, reinforces the body's anticipation of relief. The nervous system begins to rely on the unobserved intervals to regulate itself, lowering its tolerance for unassisted endurance. The mind learns that peace is available, but only within these protected moments. Silence, therefore, is not merely absence. It is a space in which dependence is cultivated safely, without interruption. Even in households without overt discussion of ether, silence shields practice. The faint trace of vapor, lingering in memory or scent, is never named aloud. The rituals of inhalation are observed only by those participating. Guests perceive steadiness, but not the preparation that produces it. Polite ignorance preserves the efficacy of intervention. The appearance of natural calm is maintained precisely because the processes behind it are concealed. Yet silence carries its own consequences. It allows dependence to grow without acknowledgement, without reflection. Tremors, emotional thinning, delayed response, all remain hidden. The lessons of experience are recorded only internally, by the body and mind, unexamined by others. The household operates smoothly, but the interior landscape has shifted. Composure is now conditional, requiring protected moments to be sustained. By the close of the season, silence has performed its dual function. It has preserved appearances and reinforced reliance. The household emerges unscathed in the eyes of visitors, yet subtly transformed within. Calm is maintained, decorum secured, and the patterns of chemical assistance and bodily expectation have been etched quietly into the rhythms of daily life. In Victorian High Society, silence is protection not merely from observation, but from the acknowledgement of how truly delicate, how chemically mediated composure has become. As the final carols fade and the last candles gutter into wax, Victorian households breathe a quiet sigh of relief. The season has passed with composure intact. Guests have departed, obligations fulfilled, and appearances preserved. Yet, even as the city begins its slow return to ordinary life, the lessons of the holidays endure, lingering in the subtle rhythms of body and mind. Christmas repeats itself not only in the calendar, but in expectation. The social machinery that demands attendance, decorum, and cheer will engage once more next year, and the household prepares, consciously or unconsciously, for the next performance. The drawing rooms will be polished again, the tables arranged, the invitations sent. The rituals, rehearsed and perfected, are themselves cyclical, returning predictably to test endurance and composure anew. For those who have relied upon ether, the repetition of the season reinforces established patterns. The body, having learned to drift and anticipate intervention, recognizes the familiar cues. The arrival of guests, the weight of social expectation, the hum of conversation and music, the prolonged hours of engagement. These cues now trigger a readiness for chemical assistance, almost instinctive in its timing. The nervous system, conditioned over previous seasons, preempts strain with subtle anticipation, signaling the need for calm before agitation can fully take hold. The mind, too, internalizes these patterns. Emotional thresholds have been subtly altered over repeated holidays. Joy is moderated, anticipation softened, and the capacity to endure without assistance diminished. Each successive season confirms the efficacy of ether, making reliance feel natural, justified, and even prudent. The ritual is not merely repeated, it becomes expected, ingrained, and anticipated, embedded into the rhythms of both daily life and seasonal celebration. Families, accustomed to appearances of perfection, rarely question this quiet dependence. They observe composure, praise endurance, and interpret smooth performance as proof of virtue. Men note steadiness and reward it with approval, reinforcing the pattern. Children internalize the association of calm with propriety. Guests remain unaware, perceiving only the flawless execution of ritual. Ether, unspoken yet omnipresent, continues its work without scrutiny or interruption. Yet beneath this polished repetition, subtle costs accumulate. Emotional flattening progresses imperceptibly. The ability to respond fully to sensation diminishes. Nervous anticipation becomes habitual, a quiet recalibration of the body's expectations. Sleep, once restorative, now relies upon ritual. Calm, once a natural state, has become conditioned. The very mechanisms of endurance have shifted, quietly guided by chemical mediation. The repetition of the season ensures the permanence of these lessons. What began as temporary assistance during extraordinary obligations now extends its influence into ordinary life. The household has learned that calm can be summoned, that composure can be maintained without strain, and that the demands of social expectation can be met with less visible effort, but at the cost of natural responsiveness. As the city sheds its garlands and silences its carols, Victorian households stand poised for the next season, their routines and rituals already internalized. Ether remains present, folded quietly into drawers, ready for the first signs of fatigue or agitation. The calendar assures repetition, the body anticipates relief, the mind trusts in intervention, and the cycle begins again, as inevitable as the snow settling on cobblestones outside, teaching once more that the holidays, though fleeting in time, endure endlessly in the patterns of dependence they cultivate. The moment the last candle is extinguished and the final sprig of holly is returned to its chest, the household exhales. The drawing rooms, once vibrant with light and expectation, settle into quiet. Tables are cleared of silver and crystal. The scent of pine and spiced confections fades, and the polished surfaces reveal the subtle marks of activity now concluded. To an observer, the season is over. The performance is complete, yet the aftermath is more complex than outward appearances reveal. For those who relied upon ether, the calm that was borrowed throughout the holidays persists only partially. The body, having learned the rhythms of intervention, does not immediately relinquish its anticipation of aid. Muscles remain slightly relaxed, pulse steadied, as though expecting the familiar vapor to arrive at the first flicker of fatigue. The mind, too, registers the absence of stimulus differently, acutely aware of the contrast between the artificially smoothed weeks and the return to ordinary demands. The household now faces a subtle reckoning. Freed from the weight of social expectation, one might anticipate relief, yet the body, conditioned by repetition, finds ordinary life unexpectedly taxing. Tasks that were once routine now seem prolonged. Conversations that were manageable with chemical assistance feel sharper in their absence. Even leisure carries a faint undercurrent of tension, a reminder that the smooth endurance of the holidays was not entirely natural. Sleep is the first domain to register this change. Nights, previously softened by ether, return to themselves reluctantly. The body has become accustomed to guided calm. Without the familiar ritual, rest feels shallower, more punctuated by restlessness and faint agitation. The mind recalls the ease that was available during the holiday weeks and recognizes the absence. Fatigue lingers longer into the day. Energy is diminished, though appearances remain intact. Emotional perception, too, is subtly altered. The heightened sensations that marked ordinary life, delight, frustration, surprise, arrive with muted intensity. The holidays, which demanded exuberance masked by chemical aid, leave behind a household habituated to moderated feeling. Where joy should rise naturally, it appears flattened. Where irritation should spike briefly, it is delayed or dispersed. The interior experience of the season lingers, quietly reshaping expectation. Families notice these changes in ways they can explain and in ways they cannot. Parents observe children who are calmer, yet slightly less engaged. Spouses and siblings recognize steadiness, yet detect a faint distance. Each misattributed sigh or subtle hesitation is rationalized as lingering fatigue rather than a sign of altered nervous calibration. Social conventions discourage inquiry. The truth, the persistent, invisible influence of chemical mediation, remains unspoken. Ether, folded away in drawers, continues its silent influence. Its absence is instructive, as much as its presence was supportive. The body remembers the relief it provided, and in anticipation, seeks similar comfort even when the calendar no longer demands heightened endurance. The mind recalls the ease of composure and begins to expect it, subtly adjusting thresholds for agitation and effort. What began as temporary relief has transformed into a learned expectation. As the household resumes ordinary life, the decorations' removal marks both the end of ceremony and the beginning of a quiet, ongoing adaptation. The season has concluded outwardly, but internally its lessons endure. Calm, once borrowed only for performance, now informs daily experience. Composure has been conditioned. Sensation has been modulated. And the household moves forward with the residual imprint of a holiday that continues to shape body, mind, and expectation, even after the last ornament has been packed away. Even after the last decorations are packed away and the household has settled back into the rhythm of ordinary life, something subtle has shifted. The body may rest, the hands may remain steady, and the drawing rooms may appear calm and composed, but the mind carries an invisible trace of the season's chemical assistance. Ether, once introduced as a temporary aid to endure heightened expectation, has left its imprint on perception, anticipation, and emotional calibration. The first sign is often in thought itself. Mental processes that were once immediate decision, attention, memory, now require a brief adjustment. Where ideas would have flowed freely, they arrive in measured fragments, tempered by the residual expectation of calm. The mind has become accustomed to drift, to chemical smoothing, and without it, awareness feels sharper, yet oddly less manageable. Mental exertion is no longer neutral. It is tinged with the faint, persistent memory of intervention. Emotions follow the same pattern. the exhilaration of a crisp morning, the delight of conversation, even the fleeting warmth of shared laughter, these now arrive muted. Pleasure is present, but softened. Frustration emerges with less intensity, disappointment with less sting. The mind remembers the mediated calm of the holidays and, in subtle imitation, tempers its own responses. Life is experienced, but through a faintly filtered lens. Sensation has been conditioned to anticipate the influence that is no longer present. Sleep, too, carries the imprint. Nights, previously supported by ether when calm was summoned without effort, have taught the nervous system that rest requires facilitation. Now, even in the absence of chemical aid, the body anticipates intervention. Sleep arrives in fits and pauses, lighter and less restorative than before. Dreams are less vivid. The unconscious feels measured, cautious, as though anticipating the arrival of aid that will not come. Mornings are greeted with residual fatigue, not alarm, yet enough to signal that something has changed. Social perception is similarly affected. The individual moves through conversation, engagement, and observation with composure intact, yet internally monitors responses in a way previously unnecessary. The mind calculates, calibrates, and tempers, adjusting experience to align with the calm that was once provided externally. Even when appearances remain flawless, the interior life has subtly shifted. Every smile, every gesture, every interaction carries an undercurrent of anticipation, the expectation of intervention to maintain equanimity. Families and households notice this indirectly, if at all. Composure is preserved, manners are maintained, and no one falters visibly. The subtle shifts in thought, emotion, and perception are internal, invisible to polite observation. Yet they influence daily life profoundly. Choices are made with consideration for anticipated strain. Interactions are measured to prevent agitation. Even leisure is moderated, because the mind recalls the smoothness of chemically assisted calm and unconsciously seeks to replicate it without assistance. Doctors, if consulted, see only that sleep and behavior have returned to acceptable patterns. The subtle recalibration of mental and emotional thresholds escapes clinical scrutiny. The patient appears restored, yet internally, the mind operates on new parameters, shaped by repeated seasons of ether-facilitated calm. Recovery is apparent only superficially. The interior landscape has been altered. In this way, minds do not fully return. The holidays, once a finite season, extend indefinitely into cognition. Experience is moderated, expectation conditioned, and perception reshaped. Calm has been taught, composure has been rehearsed chemically, and the interior self has adapted in ways that will influence every subsequent season, every ordinary day, and every interaction in which poise is required. The mind carries the quiet echo of a season that never truly ends, preserved not in memory alone, but in the very mechanics of awareness itself. In Victorian households, authority is as much a matter of presence as of action. The household runs smoothly when each member performs their role according to expectation. The mistress oversees domestic order, the staff follows instruction, and children and visitors alike conform to rhythm and routine. But when ether enters this delicate ecosystem, it begins to reshape not only the body and mind of the individual who inhales it, but also the subtle distribution of power within the home itself. Initially, the effects are imperceptible. The household appears flawless, and the mistress continues to preside over meals, gatherings, and daily obligations with practiced composure. But behind the drawn curtains and polished furniture, her reliance on chemical assistance subtly shifts the dynamic of authority. Decisions are made with less strain, patience maintained where it might otherwise have been frayed. The household benefits from her steadiness, yet that steadiness is increasingly mediated, not innate. Staff members, trained to observe and respond, notice the unchanging calm but not its source. Instructions are followed, rooms arranged, meals timed to perfection. The veneer of discipline, masks the fact that the household's operational consistency now relies partly on external aid. Composure has become chemically facilitated, and the authority derived from endurance is quietly diminished. The mistress maintains control, yes, but the organic authority once earned through the mastery of fatigue and emotion has been partially outsourced to ether. Even the family senses the change without articulating it. Children perceive fewer fluctuations in mood, fewer abrupt corrections, fewer displays of strain or impatience. The steadiness that was once the result of deliberate discipline now arrives effortlessly, mediated by vapor and ritual. The balance of domestic influence, previously earned through navigation of the household's small crises, is subtly altered. Authority becomes less a product of endurance and more a product of assisted consistency. Ether's influence is further reinforced by society's silent approval. Guests remark upon the calm efficiency of the household, praising the mistress's ability to maintain order through the demands of the season. They are unaware that her composure is chemically assisted, interpreting smooth execution as proof of skill, fortitude, and inherent authority. Social reinforcement validates the practice, embedding it further into the rhythm of household management. This transformation is gradual, almost imperceptible. At first, reliance on ether is episodic, employed only during the heightened demands of Christmas gatherings or particularly taxing events. Over successive seasons, however, the body and mind learn to anticipate assistance, using it preemptively to maintain the appearance of control. Calm becomes habitual. Authority is no longer tested through endurance. It is maintained through facilitation. The subtle consequences extend beyond the mistress herself. The household, observing the absence of strain, adjusts accordingly. Staff rely on predictability rather than improvisation. Children conform to the steady rhythm of chemical mediation rather than the natural variations of human patience. The domestic hierarchy, once dynamic and responsive to effort, becomes a landscape shaped by assisted consistency. By the close of the season, ether's influence has permeated the household. Authority remains, appearances are preserved, and the home functions seamlessly. Yet, the organic foundation of that authority, the skill, patience, and resilience cultivated through repeated, unassisted experience, has begun to erode. The mistress commands with composure, yes, but her control is subtly inseparable from the aid that smooths the tremors of mind and body. In this way, ether does more than calm nerves. It reshapes domestic power itself. The household operates efficiently and gracefully, yet the origin of authority, the capacity to endure, to respond, to guide without chemical assistance, has quietly shifted. What appears as mastery is, in part, maintained invisibly, silently, and chemically, marking a profound and largely unacknowledged transformation in the dynamics of Victorian domestic life. For years, ether was celebrated. Surgeons extolled its virtues, physicians prescribed it confidently, and the upper classes embraced its calm as a mark of modern refinement. It promised composure without compromise, relief without consequence, and its reputation grew under the weight of repeated testimony. Yet over time, a subtle unease began to ripple through the medical profession, a quiet reconsideration of the very praise that had once elevated the vapor to near miraculous status. The first hints emerged in the journals. Articles that once described ether as a marvel of nervous moderation began to adopt a more measured tone. Reports of temporary relief were still celebrated, yet they were increasingly tempered with caveats. Prolonged use might dull sensation, repeated inhalation could create dependence, the body could become accustomed to intervention, and what was once an occasional aid might become habitual. The language was cautious, carefully avoiding alarm, yet the underlying implication was unmistakable. What had been heralded as safe, refined, and entirely virtuous could carry consequences that were not immediately visible. Physicians in private practice began to notice subtle patterns in their patients. Composure during social gatherings was maintained, yes, but tremors reappeared earlier. Sleep was less restorative, and emotional responses had become muted. The same faces that once appeared naturally serene now relied on repeated intervention. The effect was not dramatic, nor did it produce overt illness, yet it was persistent. The calm was achieved at a cost that was measurable only in the mind, in the nervous system, and in the invisible adjustments of daily life. Despite these observations, public praise waned. Doctors spoke with restraint, where once they had spoken with enthusiasm. The chemical's efficacy was acknowledged, but its limits were emphasized. The language shifted from celebration to supervision. Recommendations became more circumscribed. The once confident assurances of safety were replaced with careful instructions. Moderation, discretion, attention to frequency. The vapor was no longer heralded as a miracle. It was treated as a tool whose power required respect. The retreat from praise was subtle, almost imperceptible to those outside the profession. Upper-class households continued their rituals quietly, relying on the same methods, guided by habit and expectation rather than medical endorsement. Guests noted composure and applauded it, entirely unaware of the shifting opinion behind the scenes. The authority of physicians remained, but their public enthusiasm diminished, leaving the household to continue its practices largely unchallenged. This quiet recalibration also reinforced the insidiousness of dependence. Patients internalized the caution, interpreting the vapor as something both necessary and delicate. The very act of caution heightened its perceived importance. Reliance deepened precisely because the body had been trained to anticipate relief, and the mind had been instructed to value moderation. The retreat from praise did not deter use. It subtly reinforced the perception that ether was essential to maintaining propriety. By the close of each season, the pattern was clear. Households continued to rely upon ether for calm, composure, and endurance. Doctors, aware of the subtle consequences, had tempered their commendation, choosing careful guidance over unqualified approval. The vapor's reputation had shifted from marvel to measured instrument, and in that shift lay the quiet recognition that even the most elegant aid could carry unseen weight. Thus, while the drawing rooms glimmered and conversation flowed smoothly, the medical establishment observed with restrained acknowledgement. Calm had been preserved, appearances maintained, and propriety upheld, but at the cost of lessons that were invisible to the eye, whispered only in journals, and recorded quietly in the professional conscience. The praise had retreated, leaving reliance uninterrupted, subtle, and enduring. As the years progress and chemical understanding deepens, Victorian medicine turns toward innovation. New preparations, tonics, and vapors are introduced with confidence, each promising refinement, calm, and the invisible smoothing of nerves. Yet, despite novelty, they often fulfill the same role as ether, echoing its effects and perpetuating its lessons in quiet endurance. The remedies change in name, perhaps in composition, but their promise remains consistent: composure without visible strain, calm without consequence. The introduction of these alternatives is accompanied by careful endorsement. Physicians, already wary from observations of ether's subtle consequences, present new remedies as controlled, measured, and safe. Yet the underlying logic is familiar. The household continues to demand composure. Fatigue, agitation, and tremors must be concealed beneath layers of etiquette and social expectation. The vapor, tincture, or elixir is introduced not as indulgence, but as correction, a tool to maintain the delicate equilibrium that propriety requires. Households, having internalized the prior season's lessons, accept these new aids readily. They recognize the ritual, a quiet withdrawal behind closed doors, a brief inhalation or administered dose, the return to composure without disruption. The method mirrors ethers. The effect mirrors ethers. Relief is immediate. The performance of refinement continues uninterrupted. To all observers, nothing has changed. The household remains orderly, polished, and admirable. Yet internally, the pattern deepens. The body has already learned to anticipate intervention, to expect chemical assistance as part of endurance. Each new remedy reinforces reliance, teaching that calm can be summoned before discomfort escalates. The nervous system responds with expectation. The mind, familiar with assisted drift, accommodates the new substance as seamlessly as it did the old. What is introduced as innovation is, in effect, a continuation of habit. The subtle consequences are identical. Tremors may reappear earlier without intervention. Emotional intensity remains moderated. Sleep requires ritual assistance to achieve full calm. Composure is maintained, but the interior landscape of sensation and response has been quietly reshaped. The household functions flawlessly, yet the organic capacity for endurance has begun to erode, replaced by chemically mediated expectation. Even physicians, cautious as they are, cannot fully observe the internal recalibration. They note improvement in sleep, reduction in agitation, and smoothness of conduct, yet the subtler emotional and cognitive changes escape measurement. The household appears successful, the remedies effective. The cycle repeats with every season, with every new preparation. Relief arrives, calm is restored, and appearances are preserved. Social reinforcement further entrenches reliance. Guests and family alike praise the composure, unaware of the mechanism sustaining it. Success is measured outwardly by decorum and performance, rather than internally by the natural capacity to endure. Each season, each new remedy, strengthens the association between composure and chemical aid. Dependence, subtle as it is, becomes normalized. Thus, replacement remedies, though heralded as progress, reproduce the same quiet pattern. The body drifts, the mind anticipates, and propriety is preserved. Appearances remain impeccable, while interior experience is smoothed, muted, and increasingly mediated. In the hands of households seeking refinement and composure, innovation does not break the cycle, it extends it. What is new in name or substance is old in effect. Calm, control, and appearance are secured at the quiet cost of lived sensation, repeating the promises ether first taught, and leaving the lessons of chemical aid to echo indefinitely through the seasons. Even when the last guest has departed, and the streets of London have quieted under frost and gaslight, the very memory of Christmas lingers in the household. It is not merely the scent of pine or the remnants of festive meals that endure, but the anticipatory tension ingrained into the body and mind. The season itself becomes a trigger, prompting responses learned over repeated years of obligation, ritual, and chemical assistance. For those accustomed to ether, or its later substitutes, the return of holiday expectation awakens the lessons of dependence before the calendar has fully arrived. The first stirrings are subtle. The anticipation of gatherings, the approach of extended family, the preparation of drawing rooms, all signal the body that strain is imminent. Tremors beneath lace gloves, once isolated incidents, now appear preemptively. The pulse quickens with the faintest hint of social demand. Mental tension rises not because of the immediate challenge, but in expectation of it. The body has internalized the rhythm of the season, and the chemical relief that once mediated effort has left a permanent imprint on responsiveness. Emotion is similarly conditioned. Joy is measured, anticipation muted, and anxiety surfaces in patterns aligned with previous seasons of intervention. The mind recalls that composure was achieved in prior years, not solely through effort, but through chemical aid. Even in the absence of immediate strain, the memory of relief acts as a template for current experience. The holidays, therefore, become a signal rather than an event, triggering both anticipation and preemptive reliance. For women, particularly those who bore the weight of hosting and attending, Christmas functions as a complex cue. Every decoration, every preparation, every subtle rearrangement of furniture reminds the body of the ritual behind closed doors. The handkerchief folded neatly beside the vial. Composure, once achieved effortlessly through intervention, is now anticipated with each familiar stimulus. The body and mind, trained over repeated seasons, respond automatically, seeking relief even before overt strain manifests. Men, largely unaware of the subtle internal shifts, reinforce the pattern through expectation. They observe composure and calm, reward it, and thereby validate reliance. Guests, too, perceive only the flawless performance and inadvertently perpetuate the cycle. Courtesy, approval, and praise all strengthen the association between seasonal cues and chemical support. Even the staff, accustomed to maintaining household order, register the rhythms of tension and relief. The approach of the season prompts adjustments in routine, quiet interventions to support the mistress, and an awareness that the household will operate differently as expectations rise. The holiday acts as a signal, activating a complex choreography of preparation, anticipation, and subtle chemical dependence that has become normalized over the years. By the time the first carols are sung or the first invitations arrive, the household is already partially engaged in the ritual. The body anticipates assistance, the mind expects moderation, and calm is preemptively mediated. What is intended to be a discrete response to seasonal strain has become a habitual pattern, automatically triggered by the mere context of Christmas. Even when the calendar itself has not yet dictated engagement, the lessons of prior years shape the physiological and emotional landscape. Thus, Christmas functions less as a period of celebration and more as a trigger, a cue for dependence, and a reminder of the invisible scaffolding upon which composure is maintained. The season, long celebrated for its joy and ritual, now quietly dictates expectation, guides behavior, and awakens the anticipatory responses that chemical aid has instilled. In this way, the holidays themselves perpetuate reliance, ensuring that calm and control remain intertwined with both tradition and the subtle, enduring lessons of ether. In the annals of Victorian High Society, there are many whose names are recorded for grandeur, propriety, or influence, yet countless others remain invisible, their stories preserved only in whispers behind closed doors. Among these unseen figures are the patients whose reliance on ether and its successors shaped the rhythms of domestic life without leaving trace in public record. They are the quiet witnesses to a season's demand, the hidden participants in rituals of endurance, whose inner experience is largely forgotten even as manners are preserved. These patients, often women tasked with the ceaseless labor of hosting, entertaining, and maintaining decorum, bear the weight of expectation privately while performing impeccably in public. Tremors beneath lace gloves, the faint tension in a hand, the brief pause behind a curtain, these are all imperceptible to visitors, but they are the visible manifestations of an interior struggle. Ether, administered discreetly, smooths the edges of exhaustion, enabling these women to meet every social obligation with flawless execution. Physicians, when consulted, record symptoms with clinical detachment. Notes mention fatigue, nervous agitation, and minor insomnia, yet the subtler transformations of perception, emotion, and dependence remain unquantified. The reports are factual, precise, and limited to observable signs. The deeper consequences, the thinning of emotion, the conditioning of the body to anticipate chemical assistance, the recalibration of mental thresholds, remain unspoken, largely unrecognized, and certainly unrecorded. The societal gaze, for its part, is blind by design. Guests admire composure, patience, and charm without perceiving the labor beneath. Children absorb poise as a model to emulate, not noticing the rituals required to maintain it. Husbands and fathers reward calm and endurance, interpreting them as virtue rather than as the product of careful intervention. The household, functioning smoothly, obscures the true extent of reliance, preserving manners while concealing the inner experience. This preservation of external decorum serves a dual purpose. It maintains the social contract, ensuring that appearances of refinement and control are upheld. Simultaneously, it shields the household from scrutiny that might question the methods sustaining composure. What is visible is polished and deliberate. What is invisible, the subtle dependence on ether, is quietly protected by the collective commitment to propriety. Yet this dynamic carries consequences. The patients themselves internalize the lesson that feeling fully, responding naturally, or acknowledging fatigue is inappropriate. Composure is valued over authenticity. Dependence, though invisible, becomes normative. Each season reinforces the association between calm and chemical assistance, embedding the practice deeply into the household's daily rhythms. Even when the season concludes and the decorations are removed, the memory of these interventions persists within the body and mind. Sleep patterns, emotional range, and anticipatory responses remain subtly altered. The household resumes ordinary life, outwardly unchanged, yet the internal landscape has been reshaped by repeated rituals of aid. The lessons of endurance, reliance, and expectation are quietly encoded into the physiology and cognition of those who participated. Thus, the forgotten patients, those whose names will never appear in journals or memoirs, bear the unrecorded consequences of propriety preserved through chemical intervention. Manners endure, appearances remain impeccable, and social rituals proceed without disruption. Yet behind the polished facades lies a hidden history, the subtle, enduring impact of ether upon experience, perception, and the interior lives of those who performed flawlessly while quietly relying upon its invisible support. In preserving manners, Victorian society simultaneously erases the individuals whose dependence sustained them, leaving their stories unspoken, invisible, and enduring in silence. Victorian society prizes control above all else. It is not merely a preference, but a moral imperative, woven into the fabric of daily life, defining propriety, success, and virtue. Every gesture, every phrase, every glance is measured against this standard. Composure is demanded, endurance is celebrated, and deviation is quietly censured. Within this culture, the boundaries of acceptable behavior are tightly drawn, leaving little room for error, emotional excess, or spontaneous display. It is into this environment that ether enters, a chemical ally perfectly suited to the imperatives of control. Its effect is subtle yet profound. Tremors are quieted, anxiety smoothed, sleep facilitated. The body is eased into compliance with social expectations, while the mind registers a diminished intensity of sensation. Calm arrives, appearances are preserved, and the household functions with the polished perfection society demands. The vapor, invisible and discreet, becomes a silent partner in the maintenance of control. As repeated use teaches the body and mind to anticipate assistance, reliance grows. The nervous system calibrates itself to expect intervention before strain becomes manifest. Emotional response is moderated preemptively. Physical and cognitive thresholds shift imperceptibly. In this way, control is no longer a product of discipline alone. It becomes chemically reinforced, socially sanctioned, and internally anticipated. The societal structures of the time reinforce this pattern. Men reward composure, praising the steadiness of wives, daughters, and sisters without considering the means. Children internalize the association between calm and virtue, learning to value measured response over unmediated experience. Staff observe a household that functions predictably, modeling behavior after the smoothness displayed by those they serve. Every layer of society, from family to guest to household staff, participates in the reinforcement of controlled performance. Even the rituals of celebration, particularly Christmas, with its dense schedule of visits, meals, and obligations, contribute to the culture of control. Social gatherings are tightly choreographed, leaving little room for genuine emotional variation. The body, trained over repeated seasons, learns that composure must be maintained at all times, that deviation is to be hidden, and that chemical aid is an acceptable, even necessary, means of enforcement. Control becomes both external and internal, a performance for society and a mechanism imposed upon oneself. The consequences are subtle but cumulative. Emotional depth is diminished, sensation is muted, joy, surprise, and even grief are filtered through a lens of anticipated calm. While the household appears flawless, the interior landscape has been reshaped by repeated intervention. Dependence is normalized, its presence unacknowledged, because social structures reward appearance above all else. Control, rather than being a skill earned through endurance and resilience, becomes inseparable from chemical facilitation. Medical authority, once enthusiastic, becomes quietly cautious. Physicians note subtle patterns of reliance, tempering their praise, even as they continue to endorse use for those who must meet social demands. The culture itself, however, perpetuates the expectation that composure is paramount, ensuring that reliance is reinforced across generations. The season, the household, and the social gaze converge to teach that control is paramount, that calm is a virtue, and that chemical aid is a sanctioned extension of social expectation. In this way, Victorian High Society becomes addicted not to the vapor itself, but to the principle it enforces, that life must be endured with perfect calm, that appearance must always be maintained, and that internal struggle must be concealed. Ether and its successors serve as tools, yes, but they also reveal the deeper truth of the culture, that control is a currency more valued than feeling, and that the refinement of propriety often comes at the quiet expense of interior life. The society that prizes composure so highly ensures that the lesson of chemical calm is learned, anticipated, and passed along, season after season, as natural as snow upon the streets of London. As the final days of the Christmas season approach, a quiet tension settles over the household. The drawing rooms, once filled with the chatter of guests, the clinking of silver, and the scent of spiced cakes, now echo with a softer, anticipatory hush. The season's obligations are nearly complete, yet the body and mind, trained over weeks of ritual and chemical assistance, remain alert to the residual demands of propriety. In this space, the last breath of the season becomes more than literal, it is symbolic, marking both the culmination of effort and the invisible imprint of dependence. The rituals of the holidays have conditioned the nervous system to expect calm at critical moments. Tremors beneath gloves, slight agitation, restless thought, all have been mitigated through ether, discreetly administered in moments of privacy. The body has learned the rhythm, anticipate strain, inhale the vapor, restore composure. By the final days, this routine has become automatic. The breath is drawn not in response to acute pressure, but in preemptive preparation, a subtle acknowledgement that the season, though waning, still demands perfection. Emotion, once fluid and immediate, is now tempered by anticipation. The mind softens expectation, regulating sensation in a manner reinforced over repeated seasons. Joy is measured, fatigue is moderated, even irritation is tempered before it surfaces. The household appears calm and orderly, yet the interior experience has been profoundly reshaped. Composure is no longer solely an achievement. It is mediated, chemical, rehearsed. The last breath, then, carries both relief and quiet resignation. Relief, because the peak of demand is passing, and composure can be maintained with diminishing intervention. Resignation, because the household has learned that even as the season ends, the lessons of dependence remain. The body remembers the drift, the mind recalls the easing of tension, and the expectation of aid persists. Chemical facilitation has taught endurance, but it has also subtly altered the perception of what endurance requires. Family members, largely unaware of these internal dynamics, observe only the outward calm. Guests note that the mistress remains composed, that the children are orderly, and that the household continues to function with elegance. Men commend the smooth management of obligations, reward poise, and reinforce the expectation that appearances must be maintained at all cost. The subtle orchestration of breath, veil, and vapor escapes notice entirely. Even the staff, who have observed the household across seasons, perceive only the surface. They note fewer disruptions, steadier conduct, and seamless coordination of tasks, yet they do not witness the invisible scaffolding upon which this composure depends. The last breath of the season passes silently, unnoticed by all but the individual who inhales it and by the body that anticipates it. Medical authority, once enthusiastic, now offers only cautious guidance. Physicians acknowledge the efficacy of ether for short-term relief, while observing that repeated reliance may recalibrate the nervous system in subtle ways. Yet these observations are largely abstract, divorced from the intimate rhythms of domestic life, leaving the household to continue its patterns unexamined and uninterrupted. By the close of the season, the last breath has served its function. Calm is restored, composure maintained, and appearances preserved. Yet the imprint of chemical intervention lingers. The household will return to ordinary life, carrying the lessons of anticipation, preparation, and mediated endurance. The vapor's influence, though invisible, has left its mark on both body and mind. The season has ended outwardly, but internally it endures. The last breath is both conclusion and echo, a final moment that encapsulates the delicate interplay of propriety, expectation, and chemical aid. It signifies that the holidays are over, yet the patterns they have instilled, the anticipation of strain, the ritual of relief, the quiet lesson in dependence will persist quietly, preparing the household for the inevitable return of the next season and the cycles of calm, control, and composure that define Victorian life. As the city exhales beneath frost-laden eaves and gaslit streets grow silent, Victorian households begin the slow process of shedding the trappings of Christmas. Garlands are boxed, candles extinguished, and the last notes of carols fade into memory. Outwardly, the season has concluded flawlessly. The drawing rooms are polished, the tables cleared, and every visitor departs satisfied with the household's grace and composure. Yet beneath this meticulous exterior lies a different truth, a quiet ruin that the holiday has masked, concealed behind etiquette, ritual, and chemical intervention. For weeks, ether or its successors has smoothed nerves, quieted tremors, and moderated emotional extremes. The mistress of the house moved flawlessly among guests, her hands steady beneath lace gloves, her voice measured and soft. Children obeyed without protest, staff executed duties without error, visitors were charmed and reassured by the impeccable performance of domestic life. On the surface, there is no indication of strain, no hint of dependence. Manners are preserved, composure maintained. The holiday appears perfect, yet this perfection is a veneer. The very tools that enabled calm the discreet inhalations, the folded handkerchiefs, the anticipation of chemical aid, have quietly reshaped the household. Emotional response has been thinned, Sensation has been moderated. The body has learned to drift before it is exhausted. Joy is muted, frustration softened, anticipation dulled. Sleep, once restorative, has become contingent on ritual. Calm has been outsourced. The interior landscape of experience has been subtly altered, even as appearances suggest none of this has occurred. Dependence, invisible to the social eye, has taken root. Tremors beneath gloves may now appear less frequently, but only because the body anticipates intervention before strain escalates. Nights of sleeplessness signal a subtle rebellion, yet the remedy is always at hand, ready to restore equilibrium. The lessons of repeated seasons, anticipation, preparation, chemical mediation, have recalibrated both body and mind, quietly redefining what endurance requires. Society remains unaware. Guests praise composure, reward patience, and admire poise. Men commend steadiness. Children internalize refined calm, and staff replicate patterns without insight into their origin. Courtesy, politeness, and the invisible scaffolding of intervention combine to hide the slow erosion beneath. No one recognizes the true cost, a household preserved in appearance, yet subtly transformed in its capacity for genuine experience. Medical authorities offer only partial acknowledgement. Physicians note the success of ether for immediate relief, while cautiously advising moderation. They rarely observe the long-term recalibration of the nervous system, the internalized expectation of chemical aid, or the diminishment of unassisted emotional and physical resilience. In their absence, the household continues its patterns unchecked, reinforced by both ritual and social approval. The ruin, hidden behind propriety, is thus preserved from scrutiny. It is neither dramatic nor visible, but insidious. Calm remains, composure is maintained, and the lessons of dependence are quietly codified. Each successive season will reinforce this structure, embedding chemical mediation into the rhythms of domestic life. In the end, the holiday conceals more than it celebrates. Decorations, carols, and ceremonies provide the perfect mask for a subtle transformation. What is visible is elegance, grace, and order. What is invisible is the slow, steady reshaping of sensation, expectation, and reliance, a ruin hidden not in collapse, but in the very perfection that Victorian society prizes above all else. Thus concludes the season, and the cycle it has perpetuated. The holiday hides its ruin beneath glittering surfaces, leaving appearances intact while the interior world has been quietly, irreversibly altered. Calm is preserved, manners remain impeccable, and the lessons of chemical aid endure, awaiting the inevitable return of the next Christmas to reinforce the invisible architecture of composure.